I'm Zhao Shuo. I'm not originally from this world. I died after staying up too late reading novels and playing games, and woke up here. It's been about a month since I arrived. I'm part of the Zhao family, who are the border guard kings of the Crimson Swallow Empire. Sounds impressive, right? My grandfather commands 100,000 soldiers on the western frontier, but none of that matters to me. My father isn't the firstborn son, and I'm just the child of his concubine. In this family, everything goes to the legitimate heirs. I'm nobody. Today is the ancestral worship ceremony, and after it ends, all of us who've come of age get to make one choice: join the army or take a piece of land. The army path is really meant for the legitimate sons. They'll earn glory and military achievements easily. For someone like me, a scrawny kid with no fighting skills, the battlefield would just be a quick way to die. So I have to pick land. But there's a catch. After choosing land, we also have to choose a wife. And these wives are women from disgraced families, carrying enormous debts. The family does this on purpose. Saddle us bastard sons with debt, so we never grow strong enough to challenge the real heirs. Whoever picks land first gets the worst choice of wife, and whoever picks last gets the worst land. It's a trap either way. Nobody wants to go first. So I step forward. I grab the map for Bamboo Garden. Everyone thinks I'm insane. It's a remote place with less than 1,000 people, earning only 150 silvertails a year in taxes. But they don't know what I know. That bamboo can be made into furniture, tools, even armor for the military. And more importantly, there's an iron mine hidden there. In an empire constantly at war, iron is worth more than gold. Because I picked land first, I'm dead last to choose a wife. By the time my turn comes, only 3 women remain. One carries a debt of 200,000 for her family's treason. Another is a foreign warrior woman who killed over a dozen soldiers. Her debt is 30,000. The last one has the lightest debt at 5,000, but she's sickly and frail. The clan elder tells me to just pick the sick one and be done with it. The other 2 will be executed if nobody claims them. They were already condemned. I look at all 3 of them. I can't just let 2 people die when I could do something about it. Then I'll take all 3. The whole place goes dead silent. Everyone called me crazy. Over 200,000 in debt, a worthless piece of land. They said I'd never pay it off in a lifetime. The clan elder scolded me, but I stood my ground. The rules say I can have 1 main wife and 2 secondary wives. I was just filling all 3 spots. Nothing wrong with that. I made a bold promise. 8 years to clear every coin of debt, or the elder could take my land and strip me of my status. He agreed, probably figured it was a good deal for the family either way. We held the wedding ceremony right there, all 20-something couples at once. I was the only one walking away with 3 brides. After the ceremony, they handed me my farewell package: 200 silver taels, a lord's token, some clothes, and a set of keys. Then they put us on a cart and told us to leave immediately. No time to even say goodbye to my parents. My mother had secretly hidden money in the bottom of my luggage: 953 silver taels, a gold ingot worth 50 taels, and a few pieces of jewelry. Everything she'd saved over the years. She's a concubine herself, bullied by my father's main wife, growing older and more invisible every day. I swore I'd make something of myself and bring her out of that miserable life. As our cart passed the grand gates of the border guard king's mansion, my grandfather's home, I felt nothing. He's my grandfather by blood, but the original owner of this body barely had a single memory of the man. That's how little we mattered. I looked at my 3 wives sitting across from me in the cramped cart. Each one had been left behind for a reason. Miao Shuedwa, my main wife. Her father was a marquis who joined a failed rebellion. The whole family was executed. He spent his last resources sending her here, hoping she might survive. Her debt, 200,000. She's beautiful, proud, and clearly thinks I'm a joke. Yi Qingwen, my second wife, a merchant's daughter whose father got caught bribing officials. Her debt is only 5,000, but she has some hidden illness that makes her weak and pale. She's gentle and actually grateful I chose her. Saya, my third wife, a foreign warrior, a prisoner of war. She killed over a dozen of our soldiers single-handedly. The family slapped a 30,000 debt on her as a way to burden whichever unlucky bastard son took her. She's fierce, wild, and told me straight to my face she could kill me right now if she wanted. I believed her, but the clan holds her parents hostage, so she can't act freely. I told Saya I'd give her a divorce letter after 1 year and set her free. We'd be married in name only. I wouldn't touch her. She stared at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then I unlocked all their shackles and made my promise. 3 years. Not 8. 3 years to pay off everything and give them a good life. A life like a queen's. Miao Shiwedwa laughed coldly and asked how I planned to do that with a worthless patch of bamboo. I told her I wouldn't squeeze the people for money. I'd help them earn it together. Yi Qingwen offered to do embroidery and weaving to help out. Saya said she could guard the house and fight off thieves, nothing else. Miao Shiwedwa went quiet, realizing she had no practical skills at all. We traveled for 2 days and 2 nights. When we finally arrived at Bamboo Garden, Saya jumped off the cart first, full of energy, then called out to me, sounding surprised. Zhao Shuo, what's going on here? When I stepped off the cart, my heart sank. Farmers were squatting on the ground, barely alive. There were bodies lying around. Children, nothing but skin and bones, were fighting each other over boiled grass roots. I sent Saya into the village to find out what happened. She came back with 2 young men and an old man. They all looked half-starved. The old man told us there'd been a terrible famine. The villagers hadn't had real food for 3 months. They'd been surviving on tree bark and grass roots. The old man glared at me. To him, I was just another lord sent by the king's family to squeeze them dry. Every lord before me had done exactly that. I couldn't blame him for not trusting me. I kept my composure and asked him to prepare a report on the village's population and situation. He agreed, but his tone made it clear he thought I was no different from the rest. I led our cart to the lord's manor. It was barely a manor, just a rundown courtyard with a peeling door, cobwebs everywhere, weeds taller than a person, and moss covering the stone path. Miao Shiwedwa looked at this place and sneered, asking how I planned to repay 200,000 silver from here. We cleaned the place up. Saya tore through the weeds like a storm, and Yi Qingwen helped too. After about an hour, the manor was at least livable. Then the old man brought his report. Bamboo Garden had only 580 people left, down from 1,000. Most of the young, strong workers had already fled. More than half of who remained were elderly. Every single household had no food. Miao Shiwedwa sat across from me with her arms crossed. So, what's your plan? Yi Qingwen suggested we use some of our travel money to buy grain from a nearby town. Saya offered to carry it back. But Miao Shiwedwa shut that down immediately. We had nearly 600 mouths to feed, and our money would last only a few days. She looked at me with that mocking smile. Didn't you promise us a queen's life? It's day 1 and you're already stuck. But I did have a plan. The bamboo business and the iron mine would take time and money I didn't have yet. I needed something that could make cash right away, and I knew exactly what that was: high-proof liquor. This entire region belongs to the border guard king. It's packed with soldiers, military families, merchants, and officers. And what do soldiers love most after eating? Drinking. The demand for good alcohol around here is enormous. If I could make strong, quality liquor, they'd line up to buy it. I didn't explain any of this yet. I just smiled and told my wives to wait and see. Then I handed Saya 200 silver taels and told her to go to the nearest town and buy about 100 jin of the cheapest, lowest quality wine she could find. At roughly 2 taels per jin, it was affordable. I didn't need good wine. Cheap wine was the perfect raw material. Low cost, easy to work with, and the profit margin would be huge. While I was settling into Bamboo Garden, things were happening back at my grandfather's mansion that I'd only learn about later. My grandfather, Zhao Wuji, the border guard king, sat in his grand hall reviewing the results of the ceremony. He was pleased with the 10 legitimate grandsons who'd joined the army. His sons bragged about their boys, each one hoping their child would become the next great general. My father, Zhao Feiyu, stood at the very back. He's the 38th son out of 40, a nobody among nobodies. Then my grandfather casually asked about the disgraced women, specifically the one with the 200,000 debt, who was foolish enough to take her. When the clan elder nervously told him it was me, my grandfather couldn't even remember who I was. He had to think for a while before a faint memory surfaced. Then they told him I'd chosen Bamboo Garden as my land. The legitimate sons burst out laughing. Bamboo Garden, a barren wasteland in the middle of a famine. And I'd taken on 200,000 in debt. This boy is finished. No hope for him, my grandfather said. Then the elder added that I'd also married Saya and Yi Qingwen. 3 wives total, all carrying heavy burdens. My grandfather called me foolish. Utterly foolish. He said even 80 years wouldn't be enough to pay off those debts with that land. He didn't care much, though. To him, I was just a worthless grandson from a worthless son. If I starved to death out there, so be it. He asked whose son I was. Everyone turned and stared at my father. My father stood there drenched in sweat, humiliated. My grandfather didn't even bother speaking to him, just snorted and walked away. After that, the legitimate brothers mocked my father on their way out. The other sons from concubines avoided him too, afraid my bad luck would rub off on them. My father went home furious. And who did he take it out on? My mother. He screamed at her, called her lowborn, blamed her for giving birth to a stupid son. His main wife joined in with sarcastic remarks, and the other concubines laughed at my mother's face. Then my father ordered her to go cook and heat his wine, treating her like a servant. My mother wiped her tears and went to the kitchen without a word. All she could think about was whether I was safe, whether I was eating, whether I was cold. She had no idea that I was already planning to change everything, for both of us. Back at the manor, I got to work. I set up containers in the side room and spent 3 hours distilling the cheap wine Saya had brought back. Steam poured out of the windows the whole time. My 3 wives had no idea what I was doing. When I finally came out, I tasted my creation, strong, smooth, pure grain liquor. Nothing like the weak, bitter swill I started with. It wouldn't beat the finest wines from my old world, but for this era, it was something nobody had ever tasted before. 102 gin of cheap wine turned into 50 gin of high-proof liquor. I sealed it all into 5 large jars I found in the cellar. The previous lord had been a drinker and left plenty of empty containers behind. My wives were not impressed. They smelled the alcohol on me and assumed the worst. Miao Shuadwa stood with her arms crossed, calling me unreliable. Yi Qingwen looked worried, wondering if she'd been saved by a drunkard. Saya straight up yelled at me, asking if drinking was my great money-making plan. I told them to trust me. While Saya had been out buying wine, I'd also given her 10 extra taels to pick up 300 gin of corn and sorghum, cheap grain at 3 taels per 100 gin. I divided it among the villagers, half a gin per person, just enough to keep them alive for a day. As their lord, I needed these people healthy. Dead villagers couldn't help me build anything. Miao Shuadwa did the math out loud for me. 10 taels a day on food, plus the money I wasted on wine, and our savings would vanish fast. She wasn't wrong about the numbers, but she didn't know what I knew. I told her I could earn several hundred taels in a single day. Nobody believed me. Miao Shuadwa scoffed. Saya called me a liar. Only Yi Qingwen seemed willing to give me the benefit of the doubt. So I proposed a bet. If I earned hundreds of taels on my first day of selling, all 3 of them had to grant me 1 wish, specifically, each of them giving me a child. I was a lord now, after all. Carrying on the family line was practically my duty. Miao Shuadwa called me a shameless pervert but agreed to the bet, confident I'd lose. Yi Qingwen blushed and said she wasn't ready. Saya flatly refused that particular stake, but offered that if I actually pulled it off, she'd start calling me husband as encouragement. I sighed dramatically. Being a man in this world was truly hard. Meanwhile, out in the village, the starving people ate their small portions of grain and talked about me. Some were grateful. At least this new lord fed them. Others figured I'd be gone soon. Just another lord who'd burn through his money and leave. The fact that I'd bought wine only confirmed their suspicion that I was a useless drunk. But right at that moment, something lucky happened. A large merchant caravan, 30 carts, horses, and servants, was passing through the bamboo forest road near the village. The boss, a man named Fong, was a tea trader returning from a profitable trip up north. And as his caravan moved through the area, he caught a scent drifting on the wind. The rich, powerful aroma of my liquor. He'd traveled the entire empire and never smelled anything like it. I was just about to haul a jar of my liquor to the nearest town when someone knocked on our gate. Saya opened it and found an old merchant standing there with his well-dressed daughter and a group of servants. The man's name was Fong Sihai, a tea trader, and he'd followed the smell of my liquor all the way to our door. His daughter, Fong Menger, looked around our crumbling courtyard with her nose in the air, clearly unimpressed. But old Fong was practically drooling. He said he'd traveled the empire his whole life and never smelled anything this good. He begged me for a taste and said money was no problem. I could see my wives reacting behind me. Miao Shueda's eyes went wide, not at the money itself, but at the possibility that I might actually pull this off. She started giving me looks, urging me to hurry up and close the deal. Yi Qingwen was fidgeting nervously, terrified the customer might leave. Even if we only made a few dozen taels, it would mean survival. Saya still thought I was crazy. She figured once the merchant actually tasted the cheap wine I'd started with, he'd laugh and walk away. But I wasn't worried. This high-proof liquor didn't exist anywhere in this world. I was the only one who knew how to make it. I sat Feng Sihai down at a small table in the yard and started my pitch. I told him my wine took about a year to brew using rare and precious ingredients, including expensive herbs. None of that was true, of course. I'd made it in 3 hours from the cheapest swill available, but he didn't need to know that. The story only made him more excited. When Saya offered to carry out a whole jar, I stopped her. I told her to bring just a small bowl. In business, scarcity creates value. She paused, looked at me, and for the first time I saw something new in her eyes, a flicker of respect. She was starting to realize her husband might actually have a brain for this. I brought out a small bowl of my liquor. The liquid was clear and bright, with tiny bubbles on the surface, nothing like the cloudy, weak wine people around here were used to. Feng Sihai took the bowl, studied it, smelled it deeply, then took a slow sip. His eyes lit up. Good wine, strong and full of flavor. He asked how much I had. I told him 50 jin, that's all. Behind me, my wives were holding their breath. Miao Shuedwa was whispering to herself, hoping I could get maybe 5 taels per jin. That would mean 50 taels profit on day 1, better than any other bastard son could dream of. Yi Qingwen just wanted us to break even. Saya was ready to explode from the tension. I gave my price without hesitation, 10 taels per jin. 500 taels total. Feng Sihai's daughter protested immediately. She called it robbery. But the old merchant didn't even blink. He agreed on the spot. He handed me 500 taels for the wine, then added another 200 as a deposit for future orders. He told me about a partner tavern called Welcome Fragrance in the nearby town where I could deliver and get paid quickly. All he asked was that I keep the quality consistent. I took the bundle, 700 taels of silver, 14 heavy ingots, and looked at my 3 wives. I didn't need to say a word. The money spoke for itself. After the merchant's men carried away the 5 jars and the caravan left, I sat down in the courtyard, crossed my legs, and reminded my wives about our little bet. Yi Qingwen came up behind me blushing, calling me amazing while rubbing my shoulders. She picked up one of the big silver ingots with pure joy on her face. She'd seen bigger fortunes growing up in a merchant family, but this, earning it from nothing on our very first day, gave her real hope. Miao Shuedwa admitted defeat gracefully. She said one good day didn't guarantee the future, but she kept her word. I'll leave my door open tonight, she said with a smile. If you dare. I dared. Saya charged at me from behind, wrapped her arms around my neck in a chokehold so tight I could barely breathe, and called me husband with a huge grin. Her affection was more like wrestling, but I'd take it. As the sun went down, Yi Qingwen went to cook. She was going to make thin porridge from the leftover sorghum, but I stopped her. I scooped out 3 full bowls of grain and told her to make proper rice, solid food, not watery soup. I promised them a queen's life, and even if today was humble, they'd eat well. Yi Qingwen's eyes filled with tears. Saya volunteered to tend the fire. Even Miao Shuedwa sat beside me and spoke gently for once, reminding me that making money was like rowing against the current. One mistake, and you'd be swept back. I told her not to worry. I already had a plan for what came next. That night, we sat around a small fire in the courtyard eating sorghum rice. It was tough and bland, almost hard to swallow, but it was our first real meal in Bamboo Garden, and I forced every bite down. Yi Qingwen ate slowly with a quiet smile. She felt safe. Saya finished her bowl in minutes and went for seconds. Miao Shuedwa barely touched hers. She'd grown up in a marquee household where even the dogs ate better than this. She tried a few bites to be polite, but I could see the worry behind her eyes. 300 taels of profit today was good, but could I do it again tomorrow? And the day after? 200,000 in debt was a mountain that wouldn't move easily. I watched all 3 of them and said nothing. Words were cheap. I needed to prove myself through action. After dinner, I gave Saya her orders for the next day. Buy 200 jin of cheap wine, 2,000 jin of grain, and if possible, pick up another cart and a workhorse or mule. I handed her 500 taels. She was shocked at the scale. Yesterday's haul had already filled our single cart to the brim. She asked if all that grain was just to feed the villagers. I smiled and kept it to myself. Saya grumbled that we couldn't keep pouring money into feeding people forever. She even tried to quote a saying about teaching a man to fish, though she got the words mixed up. I corrected her. Give a man a fish and he eats for a day. Teach him to fish and he eats for a lifetime. She laughed and said that's exactly what she meant. I told her to trust me and went to bed. The next day, while Saya was out shopping, things were already moving at the nearby town. Feng Sihai's partner tavern, Welcome Fragrance, had launched my liquor with a big show, dancing girls, free tastings, the whole spectacle. They were selling it at 20 taels per jin, double what they'd paid me. People went crazy for it. A rich merchant bought some immediately. A military officer tasted it and was blown away by the strength and flavor, though he winced at the price. 20 taels was his entire monthly salary. The tavern keeper played it cool, saying there were only a few jin left and implying it would sell out fast. Then a man named Zhao Quan walked in, another Zhao family bastard son who ran a horse ranch nearby. He was a serious drinker and knew good liquor when he tasted it. He ordered a full jin on the spot and savored every sip. But behind that enjoyment, I could see the gears turning in his head. He wanted to find the source. At 20 taels per jin, whoever was making this wine was sitting on a fortune, and he wanted in. My liquor was already making waves, and I hadn't even started my real plans yet. While I was busy back at Bamboo Garden, my liquor was already causing trouble I didn't know about yet. At the Welcome Fragrance tavern, the 50 jin sold out almost immediately at 20 taels per jin. The tavern made 500 taels of pure profit in a single day. Feng Sihai took his 60%, and the tavern owner kept the rest. They were both thrilled and desperate for more supply. But someone else had noticed too. Zhao Quan, the bastard son who ran the nearby horse ranch, was obsessed with finding where this liquor came from. He tried bribing a waiter for information, but the waiter genuinely didn't know. Then Feng Sihai himself walked into the tavern, and Zhao Quan's ears perked up. He pretended to go upstairs to use the toilet and eavesdropped outside the private room where Feng Sihai met with the tavern owner. He heard everything. The profit split, the excitement, and Feng Sihai's plan to secure more of my wine as soon as possible. When Feng Sihai left the tavern, Zhao Quan followed him through the streets. He watched from a distance as Feng Sihai stopped in a quiet alley and ordered 2 servants to visit my place the next morning and buy as much wine as I had. Zhao Quan couldn't hear the exact words, but he knew it was about the liquor. He tailed the 2 servants all the way to their home and memorized the location. Then he climbed a tree outside their yard and sat there grinning in the dark. His plan was simple: follow these men tomorrow and find me. And if I turned out to be someone weak, someone without backing, well, that would make things even easier for him. I had no idea that while I was planning my next move, a wolf was already circling. Saya got back from town by early afternoon with everything I asked for. Over 200 jin of cheap wine, 2,000 jin of grain, and a new cart. I got straight to work distilling. This time it went faster. I'd improved the process, cut out some unnecessary steps, and the quality came out even better than yesterday. 3 hours and I was done. When Miao Shuedwa came outside and saw me lounging in a chair I'd made myself, she couldn't believe the work was already finished, twice the amount in less time. I could tell she was starting to look at me differently, like she couldn't quite figure me out anymore. For dinner, I had a surprise. I'd sent Saya to buy 100 jin of fine white rice, 10 taels for the lot. And while the distilling was going, I'd been cooking 3 wild chickens I'd caught nearby, barely costing a single tael altogether. 1 roasted with homemade spices from wild herbs and plants. 1 wrapped in clay and baked underground, beggar's chicken. 1 stewed in a pot. In this world, cooking was incredibly basic. Most people just boiled everything in water. Rich people added salt. That was it. Nobody here had ever tasted roasted, seasoned meat before. When Saya brought the food to the table, my wives lost their composure. Yi Qingwen squealed at the sight of proper white rice and couldn't stop shoveling it into her mouth. Miao Shuedwa took 1 bite of the roast chicken and her eyes went wide. She told me she'd eaten chicken every day growing up in the Marquis mansion and had gotten sick of it, but she'd never had anything this delicious. She actually smiled at me, a real warm smile, and looked at me with completely new eyes. Saya didn't bother with manners. She bit straight into the chicken, demolished half the stew pot, and plowed through 2 heaping bowls of rice. I watched them eat and felt genuinely happy. Outside our gate, the smell had drifted through the village. Hundreds of starving villagers gathered, drooling, whispering about meat and rice. Children stared with wide eyes. Women swallowed hard. Oldly, the same man who'd glared at me with hatred yesterday, was now standing at the front of the crowd with a smile on his face, organizing everyone into a neat line. I told him earlier that every person would get another half gene of grain tonight, and that I had a big announcement to make. His attitude toward me had completely changed. After dinner, I had Saya open the gates. The villagers poured in. Over 500 people crammed into our small courtyard, with more still pushing through the door. I stood up and made my announcement. Tonight, everyone would get another half gene of grain. But this was the last free handout. Starting tomorrow, food would be earned through work. The crowd went silent, hanging on my every word. I told them I was building a brewery. 10 workers to start, 3 taels of silver per month each. The reaction was instant. Young men shouted over each other, waving their hands, begging to be picked. 3 taels could buy 100 gene of grain. That was enough to feed an entire family. Some of the single men were already dreaming about using that salary to find wives. I picked 10 strong young men from the crowd. They looked like they'd won the lottery. Then I turned to Saya and announced a second team. 10 more men for a transport and escort squad. Same pay, 3 taels per month. Their job would be buying supplies from town, and starting tomorrow, I wanted double the amount of everything. Double the cheap wine, double the grain, more carts. The people who'd been ready to walk away suddenly spun back around, hope burning in their eyes again. I did a quick count of my money. Today's purchases had eaten through almost all of the 500 taels. I had Feng Sihai's 200 tael deposit left, plus the savings my mother had hidden in my luggage. That was it. Thinking of my mother still suffering back at the mansion, I clenched my fists. I had to keep pushing. Now here's the thing my wives didn't understand yet. Why I wanted all that grain. It wasn't just for feeding people. I was going to brew my own liquor from scratch using modern techniques I knew from my old world. In this era, 100 gene of grain produced maybe 10 gene of weak wine over 3 months. With my methods, I could get 50 gene of strong liquor from the same amount in under a month. The cost difference was enormous. 3 taels of grain turning into hundreds of taels of premium liquor. I'd run both operations at once. Distilling cheap wine for quick cash and brewing from raw grain for even bigger profits down the line. As for everyone else without a job yet, I gave them a task too. Go into the bamboo forest tomorrow and start harvesting bamboo. 3 meals a day provided. I already had plans for that bamboo. In this world, most soldiers wore simple cloth armor. Only elite units had bronze plate armor. But bamboo armor, woven the right way using techniques I remembered, could block arrows, resist spear thrusts, and absorb blunt hits. It would be cheaper than metal and stronger than anything most troops currently wore. A defensive all-rounder. And I was sitting on an entire forest of raw material. The next morning, I woke early and did some push-ups in the yard. I could barely manage 20 before my arms gave out. This body was weak, but I'd build it up over time. In a world like this, being physically strong wasn't optional. A little 6-year-old boy from a nearby house came knocking to tell me visitors were approaching. I gave him 10 copper coins, and he ran off wishing me 10 sons. Hard not to smile at that. It was Feng Sihai's 2 men, right on time. They needed more liquor. The first batch had already sold out. I played it cool, saying I'd been saving this wine for myself, but could part with some since their boss was asking. They offered the same price as before, 10 taels per gene, and sweetened the deal. If I provided 100 gene, Feng Sihai would gift me a quality horse from the northern tribes on his next trading trip. Not a farm horse like the ones pulling our carts, but a proper riding horse worth over 100 taels. I agreed immediately. A fast horse meant quicker business and eventually, maybe even the start of my own mounted guard. My 10 new brewery workers had shown up by then and helped load the jars onto the merchant's cart. 1,000 taels of silver changed hands, plus a horse voucher. I watched the cart roll away with a very satisfied grin. After that, I started training the 10 men on my brewing process. We only had 1,000 gene of grain to work with, a small start, but I needed them to learn. Each man handled one step, and I kept the core techniques to myself. I also paid them their first month's wages up front, 3 taels each, so they could feed their families right away. They were beyond grateful. Then trouble walked through my gate. Zhao Quan strolled into my courtyard like he owned the place, folding fan in hand, nose pointed at the sky. Behind him came 15 men dressed in black, big, muscular, with criminal brands tattooed between their eyebrows. These were convicted killers who'd been exiled to the frontier. The kind of men who scared people just by standing there. My brewery workers froze. One of them fell to the ground in terror. These village men had never faced anything like this. Zhao Quan looked around my yard, then looked at me with a nasty smile. Zhao Shua, right? I think I've seen that name somewhere in the family registry. Here's the deal. Give me half your liquor production, and I won't make trouble for you. Otherwise, he left the threat hanging. Zhao Quan wasn't done. He started eyeing my wives, staring at Miao Shuedua's beauty, leering at Yi Qingwen, making disgusting comments. He even invited them to drink with him at his horse ranch tonight. Saya was furious but held back. She was worried that if she attacked, the 15 armed thugs would hurt me in the chaos. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a thick wooden stick and smashed it right on Zhao Quan's forehead. He went down face first into the dirt, blood running from his head. You want half my liquor? Dream on. I don't care who you are. Act wild in my home, and this stick doesn't ask for names. The whole yard went dead quiet. Zhao Quan was on the ground shaking, too stunned to get up. Even Saya was shocked. She'd been afraid to make a move against these killers, and here I was, a scrawny guy with no real fighting ability, swinging first without a second thought. Miao Shuedua had tears in her eyes. She'd never expected the man she married to have this kind of courage. Yi Qingwen shouted that she loved me. My 10 brewery workers, who'd been cowering moments ago, saw me standing firm and found their own nerve. They grabbed sticks, stones, cleavers, carrying poles, whatever they could find, and lined up behind me. Zhao Quan scrambled to the back of his group and screamed at his men to attack. The 15 thugs drew their knives. I didn't flinch. I shouted that I was a son of the Zhao family, and under the border guard king's law, anyone who harmed a Zhao heir would have their entire clan executed. 3 generations, no exceptions. The thugs froze. Killing a commoner was one thing. Touching a Zhao was something else entirely. Then I turned to my workers and threw out the big incentive. 100 taels of silver to any man who killed an enemy today. Their eyes went red. 100 taels was more money than they'd see in years, enough to feed their families for a long time. They went from scared to ready to die. While the standoff held, I quietly told Saya to go get help. She bolted out the gate before anyone could stop her and ran through the village screaming that the Lord was under attack. Within minutes, nearly 700 villagers, men, women, old and young, swarmed toward the manor carrying sickles, hoes, and whatever else they had. 200 armed men burst through the gate and surrounded Zhao Quan's thugs completely. The 15 criminals looked at the sea of angry faces and their legs buckled. They were killers, not idiots. Fighting their way out of this was impossible. Their leader dropped his weapon first and begged me to let them go. The rest followed, tossing their knives to the ground. Zhao Quan was livid. He glared at me and spat out a threat before storming off. You'll regret this, Zhao Shua. I'll make sure you can't sell a single drop of that wine. He left, but I knew this wasn't over. Zhao Quan didn't waste any time getting his revenge. By early afternoon, while I was in the middle of distilling a fresh batch, one of my workers burst in with a teenage boy who'd been cutting bamboo near the forest edge. The boy was sweating and panicked. He'd seen a large group of horsemen blocking the crossroads, the only route connecting Bamboo Garden to the outside world. Some of them were the same thugs from this morning. I told everyone to stay calm and went to see for myself. My 3 wives insisted on coming. As we walked, more and more villagers fell in behind us carrying whatever tools they had. At the crossroads, Zhao Quan sat on a black war horse looking very pleased with himself. Behind him were his original 15 branded criminals plus 50 more mounted men, all armed with sabers or cavalry lances. Properly trained riders on real military horses. He laughed when he saw my ragged crowd approaching. Then he made his demands, far worse than before. He wanted 80% of my liquor for free. He wanted me to crawl between his legs on my knees as an apology, and he wanted my 3 wives at his beck and call. I said nothing, so he signaled one of his riders. The horseman charged straight into my people at full speed, knocking villagers aside like weeds. An old woman tried to run. The rider drove his lance clean through her body. My villagers were furious but helpless. They couldn't catch a man on horseback. Several more people were knocked down and injured. Zhao Quan laughed and said this was what happened to anyone who crossed him. I felt my blood turn to ice. This morning had been intimidation. This was murder. I added Zhao Quan's name to a list in my head, a list with only one possible outcome. Someone next to me recognized Zhao Quan and whispered fearfully about his power. He ran the military horse ranch, kept a private army of outlaws and trained cavalry, and even recruited rogue martial artists. Miao Xuedu's face went white. She begged me to give in. Just let him have his share. Yi Qingwen agreed, saying money wasn't worth people's lives. Even Saya, who feared nothing, frowned and pointed out the practical problem. With the road blocked, we couldn't sell liquor or buy supplies. We'd be trapped. But giving in wasn't an option, not after he'd killed one of my people right in front of me. My people thought I was going to surrender. They'd heard my wives urging me to give in, and their faces fell. They figured the old woman had died for nothing. But I made myself clear in front of everyone. Not 8%, not 1%. Zhao Quan would get nothing. And anyone who hurt my people had earned a permanent spot on my list. The villagers erupted in applause. Zhao Quan was furious. He ordered his 65 men to hold the crossroads permanently. No carts in, no carts out. Then he rode back to his horse ranch, promising to send his men cooked lamb to keep them comfortable while they starved us out. Back at the manor, the mood was grim. Miao Xuedu sat there full of worry. Yi Qingwen did the math out loud. Even with the 6,000 gene of grain we'd bought today, half was needed for brewing, and nearly 700 people eating 3 meals a day would burn through the rest in days. Saya wanted to charge the blockade with every villager we had. I came out of the side room having just finished distilling another 200 gene of high-proof liquor from the afternoon's supply. I stayed calm, at least on the outside. I told them we'd keep feeding everyone. These people had stood up for me today. That loyalty had to be honored. Then I gave Saya specific instructions. Visit every injured person and bring them grain and silver according to how badly they were hurt. And for the old woman's family, 100 taels. Saya was stunned by the amount. But I had my reasons. There's an old saying about spending a fortune on a dead horse's bones to prove you value loyalty. 100 taels was a lot of money for us right now, but it would buy something far more valuable, the absolute devotion of every person in Bamboo Garden. Saya went out with 2 guards, carrying sacks of grain and pouches of silver. The wounded villagers tried to refuse, saying the Lord had enough troubles already. Saya didn't argue. She just left the supplies and walked out. The last stop was the dead woman's home. Her family, 2 sons and 2 daughters, were weeping over her body, laid out on rough wooden planks. The eldest daughter was crying, wondering if their mother had died for nothing, whether the Lord would even acknowledge what happened. The eldest son guessed they might receive a small amount of grain and a few coins, like the injured families. Then Saya walked in and placed 2 50-tael silver ingots on their broken table. 100 taels. The whole family went silent with shock. Saya left without a word. The daughter wept and told her mother she could rest in peace now. The eldest son wiped his eyes and swore that after burying their mother tomorrow, he'd work harder than ever. His loyalty to me had multiplied many times over. That was exactly what I'd counted on. That evening, the villagers came back from the bamboo forest carrying huge bundles on their backs. The men had each cut around 200 gene, the women about 180. They were tired but happy. I kept my promise and fed them 3 full meals despite the blockade. Word spread fast about the compensation I'd given the injured. When people heard that even a man with a minor bruise got 10 gene of grain and 2 taels of silver, they were stunned. It made them more loyal than any speech could. They started walking faster toward the manor, eager to prove themselves. I inspected the bamboo they'd brought and was pleased. They'd chosen the right kind, thick, tough stalks with long fibers, perfect for armor weaving. I announced that starting tomorrow, 50 women would begin processing the bamboo into long strips right outside the manor, 3 meals a day included. Hands shot up everywhere. Then something unexpected happened. One of the women stepped forward and said I didn't need to feed them until they were full. Half portions would be fine. Others agreed, men included. They could see our situation. With the road blocked, no liquor going out and no grain coming in, Our supplies had an expiration date. Yi Qingwen stood beside me looking anxious and said the same thing. I told them all not to worry. Full meals would continue. I had a plan. Nobody believed me. Old Lee muttered outside the gate, wondering what I could possibly do with the main road cut off. The villagers went to sleep that night uncertain, but I was already thinking ahead. The next morning, I woke early and called Saya. I told her to saddle a horse and strap 2 jars of liquor to it. Then I grabbed a half sack of potatoes, a bag of other supplies, and had 2 of my transport men carry out our small table and stools. Everyone was confused. Saya thought I might be running away. The 2 men whispered to each other, trying to figure out what I was doing. I led them around the back of the village to a narrow trail on the mountain's far side. It was small, winding, and sandy, too rough for carts, which is exactly why Zhao Quan hadn't bothered blocking it. But it was a shortcut to the county seat and several military outposts, and horsemen used it regularly. Soldiers riding between posts, wealthy travelers on horseback. There was steady foot traffic here. Zhao Quan had blocked the main road, so I'd sell from the back door. I set up our little table, arranged the wine jars, pulled out my one precious iron cooking pot, and started preparing food right there on the trail. The road was dead, but I was alive. My fate was mine to decide. I set up the iron wok on the trail, dropped in a chunk of lard, sliced some potatoes into thin strips, threw in a handful of chili peppers, and started stir-frying. The smell hit everyone immediately. Saya still doubted me. Who would buy wine and food in the middle of nowhere? But my 2 helpers were already drooling uncontrollably. They'd thought plain sorghum rice was a luxury. They'd never smelled anything like this. My secret weapon wasn't just the liquor. In this world, nobody knew how to stir-fry. All cooking was boiled. Good wine alone might not stop a passing horseman, but the combination of incredible food and incredible drink, no human being could resist that. We didn't wait long. Hoofbeats echoed down the trail. 3 military riders appeared, a captain named Zhou Qi and 2 officers under him. They'd been riding for 3 days straight, delivering urgent reports to the border guard king's mansion, starving and exhausted. Zhou Qi smelled the food from a distance and pulled up hard. He asked what it was. I told him it was a rare delicacy. He looked at the prices: stir-fried potato shreds for 2 taels a plate, egg-fried rice for 1 tael, and the liquor at 20 taels per jean. Expensive, but he didn't hesitate. He ordered food for all 3 men plus a jean of wine to share. The first bite of egg-fried rice made them lose their minds. One officer kept giving me thumbs up. The other was shoveling food into his mouth like a starving animal. Zhou Qi said he'd eaten at generals' mansions and even at the border guard king's own table, but never tasted anything this good. Then they tried the spicy potato shreds and started shouting with joy. They ordered second helpings of everything. Then Zhou Qi asked me to fill all 3 of their water canteens with liquor, about 6 jean total. The final bill: 30 taels for the food, 120 for the wine, 150 taels from 3 customers in one sitting. Zhou Qi tossed me 3 large silver ingots, patted his belly, promised to come back, and galloped away. Saya threw her arms around my neck, grinning from ear to ear. I had to beg her to let go before she choked me to death. I sent my 2 men back to the manor on horseback to bring every last jar of liquor to the trail. We'd barely opened, and 1 jar was almost gone. 200 jean of high-proof liquor was waiting back home, and I had a feeling it would all sell today. Zhao Quan thought he'd strangled my business by blocking the main road. He had no idea I'd just opened a restaurant on the back trail, and business was booming. While I was thriving on the back trail, Zhao Quan's men were still camped at the main crossroads, feeling very proud of themselves. They turned away Feng Sihai's 2 supply carts that morning, scared the drivers half to death with drawn swords. The thugs joked about how I'd starve soon, how my bamboo harvesting was pointless, how I'd be finished without any income or supplies. They had no clue what was happening on the other side of the mountain. By midday, I'd already sold half of my 200 jean of liquor and nearly 200 plates of egg-fried rice plus over 100 plates of stir-fried potato shreds. The food alone brought in over 400 taels. The costs were almost nothing: 100 jean of rice for 10 taels, a few eggs, some lard, salt, wild peppers, and potatoes. I had Saya and the 2 guards help me set up a simple tent so we could rest between customers. During a quiet spell, I invited Saya in to relax. She came in all right and immediately started wrestling me. I screamed in pain while the two guards sat outside pretending not to hear, exchanging knowing grins. Then, in the early afternoon, something big happened. A party of 21 horsemen appeared on the trail from the direction of the military outposts. The man in front wore fine white clothes with an expensive jade pendant at his waist. He carried himself like someone important. This was Li Dingxian, the Earl of Pingxi, commander of 5,000 elite cavalry known as the Pingxi Riders. He'd made a real name for himself fighting northern barbarians on the frontier, a commoner who'd risen through pure talent and effort, winning the Imperial Martial Arts Championship and earning his noble title from scratch. Now he was being recalled to the capital, likely because the powerful families, including the Border Guard King's faction, feared his growing reputation. He spotted my little roadside stall and rode over, amused that anyone would sell wine in such a remote spot. His guard captain almost drew his sword at my casual tone, but Li Dingxian waved him off. I offered him a bowl. He stayed on his horse, skeptical. Then my man cracked open a fresh jar. The aroma exploded into the air. Li Dingxian jumped off his horse immediately. He downed the bowl in one gulp, slammed it on the table, and shouted for another. He called it the finest wine he'd ever tasted, perfect for a moment like this. A warrior on the road with a heavy heart, finding an unexpected treasure. I'd just met one of the most powerful military men in the northern frontier, and he was sitting at my little table, drinking my wine, completely delighted. Li Dingxian called his entire escort over to drink. 21 men crowded around my little stall, downing bowl after bowl. He said he'd never tasted anything this good, not in the north, not even in the capital. He bought every drop I had left, 9 full jars, 100 jin total. His men split it among their travel canteens and took it all. Then he studied me carefully and made an offer. Come back to the capital with him. He'd set me up as his personal brewer or fund me to open a tavern in the imperial city. I thanked him but turned him down. I told him I liked it here. And then I said something that came from the heart. We men of this generation should stand at the front. The northern border is the Empire's last line of defense, and someone has to hold it. Li Dingxian went quiet. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Then he said those words were more noble than anything he himself had ever spoken, and he was a decorated war hero. While we talked, I cooked 20 plates of spicy potato shreds, then scrambled eggs with chili and beef tallow. His guards ate like they'd never seen real food before. His captain whispered that I was just a lowly cook not worth the Earl's attention. Li Dingxian shut him up immediately. He asked me to explain my ideas about defending against the northern barbarians. I told him the nomads dominated because of their mounted archers and mobility. But if our soldiers had strong enough armor for defense and weapons with greater range and speed, combined with solid formations advancing step by step, those horsemen wouldn't be so terrifying. Li Dingxian was intrigued but skeptical. Heavy armor like that meant iron, and iron was desperately scarce in this empire. Only the palace guards wore iron plate, and even that was just iron scales stitched onto leather. Full iron armor was a fantasy, too expensive, too rare, too heavy. That's when I leaned in close and told him quietly. I could supply him with a type of armor that was light enough to move in freely, but strong enough to match iron plate in protection. All I asked was that he keep it to himself and not resell it. His eyes lit up. He could tell I was serious. Something in his gut told him I was someone worth trusting. He handed me a personal token engraved with his family name, Li, and told me about a residence he kept in Shanyang County. When the armor was ready, I could deliver it there. Then he asked if there was anything I needed help with right now, since he'd be leaving for the capital soon. I'd come to this trail expecting to sell wine and food. Instead, I'd found something far more valuable, a powerful ally who respected me, and a guaranteed customer for the bamboo armor I hadn't even started making yet. Before I could even ask Li Dingxian for help, Saya blurted out that we desperately needed grain. Li Dingxian turned to me, and I told him straight, 10,000 jin to start. He didn't blink. He said he knew grain merchants in Shanyang County and could have a camel caravan deliver it by tomorrow morning. The county was too far for carts to make it tonight, but a caravan at first light would reach us before noon. That solved everything. Zhao Quan could block the main road all he wanted. My supplies would come from the opposite direction. Li Dingxian said he wasn't doing this just for the wine or the armor. He said he was doing it because he liked me as a person. He asked that I keep sending liquor to his residence in Shenyang County at 20 taels per jean, and he'd always pay fairly. Then I made him a promise. 500 sets of armor delivered to his estate within 1 week. His breathing quickened. If the armor was as good as I claimed, his personal guard in the capital would become significantly more powerful, which would strengthen his position at court and help his political mentor. He handed me 300 taels of gold, worth 3,000 taels of silver. The actual bill for his group's food and wine was around 2,100 silver taels, but he insisted I keep the extra and wouldn't hear any argument about it. Then he mounted his horse, told me his name, Li Dingxian, the Li residence on the north side of Shenyang County, and rode off toward the capital with his escort. I watched them disappear down the trail. Today's total earnings, not counting material costs, over 5,400 taels of silver. An absolute windfall. On the walk home, Saya grabbed my ear and demanded to know how I'd figured out Li Dingxian was a nobleman. I yelped in pain and told her, ordinary people don't travel with 20 armed guards, and those men had the cold, hardened look of soldiers who'd survived real battlefields. That's why I'd set up shop on this particular trail in the first place. I knew important people used this shortcut between the military outposts and the county seat. Saya finally let go of my ear, looking at me with new eyes. She was starting to understand. Nothing I did was random. Every move had a reason behind it. We packed up our stall and headed home. My 2 guards were grinning from ear to ear, already fighting over who'd get to come with me next time. After tasting egg-fried rice and spicy potatoes for lunch, this roadside stall duty had become the most coveted job in Bamboo Garden. The next morning, I brought 100 men to the back trail and waited. Right on schedule, a camel caravan appeared, over 20 camels loaded with grain. Li Dingxian had kept his word perfectly. The merchant in charge verified my identity with the token Li Dingxian had given me, then laid out the delivery. 15,000 jean total, 6,000 of sorghum, 7,000 of corn, and 2,000 of fine rice. Retail price would have been 590 taels, but he gave me the wholesale rate of 500. No delivery fee this time, as a favor to the Earl, though next time there'd be a charge. I paid him 550, the extra 50 as a goodwill tip. He appreciated that. I understood something important. Relying on someone else's connections forever doesn't work. Paying fairly builds relationships that last. He gave me a pair of carrier pigeons for future orders, and my 100 men hauled the grain back to Bamboo Garden in 2 trips. With the food crisis solved, I got the 7,000 jean of corn divided among my brewing workers to start the fermentation process. Then I rode out to a village 5 miles past the back trail where they had fish ponds and a river. I bought 10 fish for just 1 tael of silver. Back at the manor, I cooked 3 different dishes: steamed perch, braised carp, and spicy grilled fish. My wives gathered around the table practically glowing. Miao Shuadwa had been terrified we wouldn't survive the food shortage, and now she was looking at me like I was the most capable man alive. Then Saya came running in, drenched in sweat. She'd spent the morning exploring back roads and found 3 small wine estates and an entire winemaking village beyond the back mountain. She'd negotiated deals with all of them. Their total monthly output was 15,000 jean of cheap wine, which would give us a steady supply even with the main road blocked. But there was a catch. They wanted half the money up front as a deposit. For just one estate's 5,000 jean batch, that was 5,000 taels. I'd earned over 5,400 yesterday, but had already spent 550 on grain this morning. Paying deposits to multiple suppliers would drain me completely. Miao Shuadwa and Yi Qingwen were furious at Zhao Quan. If he weren't blocking the main road, we could buy cheap wine freely from any of the dozens of shops in the nearby town. No deposits needed. But I'd already figured this out. I told Saya, no deposits. We'd only buy finished wine, ready for pickup. From the first batch in 3 days, we'd take 2,000 jean, sell it, then come back for more. We needed to keep cash on hand for grain. That was the priority. Feeding nearly 700 people cost 1,000 jean of grain per day, and even with today's delivery, our reserves only covered about a week. Miao Shuadwa's face shifted from worry to admiration in seconds. She stood up, smiling, and offered to serve me rice, something she'd never done before. I told Saya to head out again that afternoon and pick up some vegetables, beef, and lamb on the way. I'd cook everyone something special tonight. Things were looking up. Zhao Quan thought he had me cornered, but I was building supply lines he couldn't even see. 3 days passed. Saya went to pick up our first batch of cheap wine from the small estate beyond the back mountain. 2,000 jin for 4,000 taels. The quality was decent, and the owner seemed eager for repeat business. But I didn't know that the estate's owner, a woman called Xiao Tao, was already eyeing us with greedy suspicion. She ran a shady operation. Travelers who flashed too much money around her place had a habit of disappearing. She sent her people to investigate who we were. That was a problem I didn't see coming yet. Back at the manor, just as Saya returned, 2 of my bamboo cutters burst through the gate in a panic. 8 people had collapsed in the forest. 5 strong men, 2 elderly workers, and a 13-year-old boy, all unconscious. I hurried to the bamboo grove with my wives following behind. The villagers had laid the 8 out in a shaded area. Our only village doctor was still recovering from injuries caused by Zhao Quan's men days ago. I used what I remembered from my old world, pressing their philtrum points, giving them water. The boy woke up in my arms, but could barely stand. He said his body had gone weak and dizzy without warning. Then the other villagers spoke up. They'd all been feeling the same way lately: fatigue, dizziness, weakness. I understood immediately. Malnutrition. They were eating enough sorghum to fill their stomachs, but heavy physical labor demanded more than just grain. Their bodies were desperately lacking salt and proper nutrients. Without salt, muscles fail and people collapse. And salt in this region was a nightmare. The supply was controlled by a chain of aristocrats, officials, and merchants who kept prices sky high. Even the cheapest coarse salt cost 25 taels per jin in the nearest town. On the back mountain roads, local landlords who'd stockpiled salt were charging 50 taels per jin. Highway robbery. I did the math. 500 taels, nearly all we had left after buying the wine, would only get us 10 jin of salt at those prices. Split among 700 people, that was nothing, and the main road was still blocked, cutting us off from the town's cheaper salt markets. Miao Shuadwa looked at me with anxious eyes and quietly reminded me we only had 500 taels left. Yi Qingwen nearly cried at the 50 tael price. I told the villagers to take the collapsed workers home to rest, reduce everyone's workload, and assured them I'd find a way to get salt. But inside, I was rattled. I needed to earn money faster, and I needed to break through that roadblock. Zhao Quan's siege was no longer just an inconvenience. It was becoming a threat to my people's survival. It was one problem after another. Just when I'd solved the food crisis, salt blindsided me. As the old saying goes, when the roof leaks, the rain pours harder. I didn't know it, but that wine estate owner, Xiao Tao, had been watching us. She was a greedy, dangerous woman who ran a shady operation. Travelers who showed too much money near her place sometimes vanished. She sent her lackey, a weasel of a man called Wang Lauer, to spy on us. He came back with everything: who I was, where I lived, the feud with Zhao Quan, the fact that I was using the back trail because the main road was blocked. And Xiao Tao saw her opportunity, not to rob me, but to sell me out. She sent Wang Lauer straight to Zhao Quan's horse ranch that very night. Zhao Quan had been stewing for days, confused about why Bamboo Garden showed no signs of starving. His blockade was costing him a fortune, 65 men at 1 tael per day each, plus meat, wine, and horse feed. And yet my villagers kept working, kept eating, kept thriving. It made no sense to him. Then Wang Lauer knocked on his door at midnight and told him everything. The back trail, my roadside stall, the supply lines through the mountains. Zhao Quan erupted. The next morning, I was setting up my stall as usual. Iron wok heating up, horses loaded with wine jars coming down the trail. Everything felt routine. Then I heard it. Thunder across the ground. Hoofbeats, dozens of them. Zhao Quan had brought 70 mounted men, every last fighter and servant from his ranch, charging up the back trail in full cavalry formation. These weren't ordinary thugs anymore. These were men who'd trained on horseback for years at the horse ranch, riding in tight assault patterns. "Retreat," I shouted. Saya reacted instantly, turning the wine-laden horses around, but they were too fast. The lead rider reached me before I could even grab my iron wok. He kicked it over, sent it clanging across the rocks, and stood over me laughing. He mocked me, asking why I wouldn't just be Zhao Quan's dog like everyone else. Then Zhao Quan himself rode up slowly, looking down at me from his horse with that disgusting smirk. His demands had changed. He no longer wanted just a share of the wine. Now he wanted my entire brewing technique. And he wanted me to crawl to him on my knees, call him master, and beg forgiveness. He called me a dog, said even as a member of the Zhao family, I was nothing more than the family's most pathetic mutt, and he was just kicking over my dog bowl. I stood there looking up at him, covered in dust, my overturned wok steaming on the ground beside me. Zhao Quan wanted me to call him master. I looked him dead in the eye and fired back. You want me to call you my elder? You know who my grandfather is, same as yours. You're asking me to make you your own father's father. That's not just disrespectful, that's unfilial. You call me a dog? Dogs are more loyal to their family than you are. A few of his own soldiers couldn't help laughing. Zhao Quan's face turned purple with rage. He screamed at his men to seize me and beat me senseless. 30 riders dismounted and closed in from all sides. I was trapped. Up on the mountainside, Saya saw everything. She wanted to charge down immediately, but the villagers held her back. Running into 70 armed horsemen would only get her killed and not save me. An old man suggested they all go together if it came to that, every last person ready to fight. I could see them watching from the hillside. If I didn't handle this carefully, Saya and those villagers would rush down and people would die. This world's courts didn't care about justice. They cared about power and connections. Zhao Quan had both. A massacre of my people would go unpunished. So I used my head. When the lead rider reached for me, I said loudly, "Are you sure Zhao Quan would take responsibility for you? Would he really risk punishment from the clan just to protect a hired thug?" That stopped the man cold. Then I pretended to give in. I sighed heavily, spread my hands, and told Zhao Quan I'd hand over my brewing technique. He was instantly thrilled, practically drooling at the thought of owning the secret. I told him the process was written down on paper and required specific equipment. I needed 2 days to prepare everything, and then I'd deliver it to his horse ranch personally. He thought it over, then agreed. He rode off grinning, leaving 70 men to guard the back trail with orders to kill me if I didn't deliver within 2 days. On his way out, that weasel Wang Lauer, the spy from Xiao Tao's wine estate, chased after him begging for his promised cut. Zhao Quan whipped him across the face with his riding crop and told him to get lost. So much for loyalty among thieves. I walked calmly through the gap the riders made for me and climbed back up the mountain. Saya ran to me, relieved, telling me it was the right call to surrender the technique. My safety mattered more than secrets. The old villagers nodded in agreement, though I could see the worry in their eyes. Without the liquor business, how would we survive? I smiled at all of them. I was bluffing. It's called an empty city strategy. Look them in the eye and pretend you're giving them what they want while you plan your real move. There's no way I'm handing over anything. He can keep dreaming. Saya blurted out our situation in front of everyone. Both roads blocked. Wine stuck with no buyers. Grain running low. No salt. The villagers started looking desperate again. I told them not to worry and announced we'd slaughter the cow Saya had bought a few days ago. The moment they heard meat, their eyes lit up and the gloom lifted. These people lived day to day. A meal of beef was something to celebrate. But I had real problems to solve. Money, grain, salt, and now 2 blocked exits. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. First, the salt issue. When Miao Shuo brought it up, I told her I'd get them fine salt. The pure, white kind that only noble families could afford. She thought I was crazy. Fine salt cost at least 100 taels per gene, and even at that price it was nearly impossible to find. The black market charged several times more. I told her to wait and see. Then I turned my attention to the bamboo. The women had been processing strips for days, and the pile of smooth, polished bamboo pieces was ready for assembly. I organized 50 women into a production line, each group handling one step of the weaving process, while I managed the critical techniques myself. 2 hours later, the first suit of bamboo armor was finished. 18 gene of raw bamboo compressed into a 10 gene upper body vest. I tested it, strong enough to stop a blade slash, resist a spear thrust, deflect arrows, and absorb blunt hits. For light infantry, it was excellent. I told the women to keep going and went inside to cook lunch. Stir-fried beef, spicy potato shreds, scrambled eggs, and braised fish. My wives devoured everything. Saya didn't even wait for me to serve. She scooped beef straight into her bowl and started eating. Over the meal, I told my wives my plan. I didn't share the details with the reader yet, but Miao Shuo was jaw-dropped. She said the idea was brilliant. wild, unexpected, and exactly the kind of bold move nobody would see coming. Yi Qingwen was so happy she could barely chew her beef. By evening, all 50 suits of bamboo armor were complete. I called over 50 of my strongest young men, had them put the armor on, and lined them up in formation. They looked like real soldiers. I tested the armor with a stick, hit one man hard across the chest. He barely flinched. The pain was almost nothing. 50 armored men. Not trained warriors yet, but a start. Zhao Quan had his cavalry and his thugs. Now I was building something of my own. I tested the bamboo armor thoroughly, stabbing it with sharpened bamboo spears at close range and from a distance. The layered, flexible weave absorbed everything. It held up beautifully. The 50 young men wearing it looked transformed. They stood taller, puffed with pride, especially when the village girls started staring. I immediately began drilling them. Attention, forward face, left face. Basic military formation commands from the university training I remembered from my old life. They were clumsy at first, but improved fast. Saya begged to join. I told her no. In a formation, individual fighting skill doesn't matter as much as discipline. And if she broke ranks, it could get everyone killed, including herself. While the men trained, I sent another 50 villagers to select the right bamboo for weapons. They came back with 100 poles, each over 3 meters long, tough and perfectly thick for gripping. We shaved them smooth, sealed one end flat, and sharpened the other into a point. Within an hour, we had 100 bamboo spears. Then I moved to the real game changer, crossbows. This empire's archery technology was terrible, short range, poor accuracy. That's partly why they kept losing to the Northern Horsemen. But I could design something better. I drew blueprints for 15 handheld crossbows, each roughly the size of a rifle, manageable for one person to aim and fire. I gave the designs to Li Qing, the best carpenter in the village. He studied them, admitted the shape was strange, but said he could build them with his decades of experience. I told him I needed all 15 by dawn. He gathered 2 more old carpenters and 7 apprentices, and they worked through the entire night sawing and shaping wood in the courtyard. Meanwhile, I led 10 young men in building the trigger mechanisms, the critical piece that determined range and accuracy. I kept the design simple, maximum effectiveness with minimum complexity. This wasn't for war yet. It was for breaking Zhao Quan's blockade. By 4 in the morning, the first crossbow was assembled. The stock, the trigger mechanism, and bowstrings made from cattle sinew all came together. I loaded a sharpened bamboo bolt into the groove. Each crossbow could fire 3 to 5 bolts at once or single shots with rapid reloading. I tested it. The bolt flew 200 meters and punched 20 centimeters deep into a sack of rice. Old Li Qing's jaw dropped. The other carpenters and their apprentices cheered. They'd worked all night, and the result exceeded everyone's expectations. With iron or bronze arrowheads, the penetration would be even deadlier, but that was a problem for later. I had Saya cook rice porridge with 2 eggs per person for the exhausted craftsmen, plus a silver tail bonus each. By dawn, all 15 crossbows would be finished and ready. Tomorrow, I was taking back my roads. I barely slept 2 hours before Saya shook me awake. Everyone was already assembled outside. I pulled myself together and walked out. I spent the next 2 full days drilling my 50 armored men. First, the mountain formation, 5 rows of 10, all spears pointing forward in a wall of sharp bamboo tips. 1 spear can break. 1 row can be overwhelmed, but 5 rows deep, locked together, becomes a fist that no cavalry charge can easily punch through. Then the hedgehog circle, all 50 men facing outward in a ring, spears bristling in every direction, with the 15 crossbow shooters protected inside the formation. The crossbows could fire through the gaps while the spearmen held the perimeter. Saya watched the drills with her mouth hanging open. Even the village girls who'd ignored these men before were suddenly paying attention. The men themselves could feel the difference. They weren't scared farmers anymore. They were something. Meanwhile, Zhao Quan had been waiting at his ranch for me to deliver the brewing equipment and techniques I'd promised. By noon on the second day, nothing had arrived. He finally realized I'd played him. He was livid. He screamed for his horse and announced he was going to storm Bamboo Garden personally, beat me half to death, humiliate me in public, and seize my entire territory. Under the Border Guard King's rules, a stronger lord could absorb a weaker one's land just by filing paperwork afterward. The loser would be sent back to the mansion as a broken man, or worse, stripped of status entirely. He gathered all 65 riders from the main road blockade, combined them with his own escort, and marched the whole column straight toward our village in battle formation, lances and sabers out, horses in lockstep. My scout came running back to report they were approaching. I was ready. I assembled my 65 fighters, 50 armored spearmen and 15 crossbowmen, and addressed them one final time. Form up. March out with me. Anyone who wants to leave, step forward now, no shame. But once we're on the field, there is no retreat. Anyone who runs will be killed on the spot. Then I laid out the rewards. 500 taels to the family of anyone killed in action. 100 taels for a light wound. 300 taels for a serious injury, plus ongoing support for their household. I smashed a bowl on the ground to seal the oath. Fight to the death. No retreat. 65 voices roared it back at me. Not a single man stepped out of line. We marched out to meet them just beyond the village entrance. My 50 spearmen in the center, 15 crossbowmen spread on the flanks and rear. The men were sweating, some trembling, but they held formation. Zhao Quan's cavalry came into view. 65 riders, the 15 branded killers leading the charge with the 50 household soldiers behind them. Zhao Quan himself stayed safely in the back, watching like it was entertainment. He'd ordered them to kill everyone, including my villagers, break my leg, and drag me back for humiliation. He said he'd take full responsibility with the family. The 15 killers charged first, whooping and confident. Their leader Galaulu figured we were just farmers with sticks, nothing to worry about. I waited. Timing was everything. Too early, and the spears lose impact. Too late, and we'd be overrun. At 10 meters, I gave the command. Spears out. All 5 rows thrust forward simultaneously. 50 sharpened bamboo poles formed a dense wall of points, each one 3 meters long. The charging riders had no room to dodge. The front 15 slammed straight into our spear wall. Men were skewered. Horses screamed and crumpled. Blood sprayed everywhere. Behind them, another dozen or so riders couldn't stop in time and crashed into the pile, though the bodies in front absorbed some of the impact. Forward. Spears out. March. My men stepped forward in unison, pulled their spears back, and thrust again. The second wave of riders was cut down. Something changed in my men at that moment. The fear drained from their faces. They'd just watched trained cavalry shatter against their wall. Their hands steadied. Their eyes hardened. Zhao Quan was stunned. He'd expected his riders to scatter us in one pass. Instead, he'd lost over 25 men in seconds. He screamed at the remaining 40 to split up, 1 group to pin us from the front, 3 groups to hit our sides and rear. His cavalry commander understood immediately and reorganized. 10 riders held our front, while the rest split into 3 flanking groups charging toward our sides. Back at the village entrance, Yi Qingwen screamed my name in terror. Miao Shuedwa said nothing, hands clenched, but her eyes were steady with confidence. Saya held Yi Qingwen back, grinning, barely able to contain herself from joining the fight. The battle wasn't over. The flanking attack was coming. The flanking attack came from 3 sides at once. But I was ready. Hedgehog circle. My men shifted instantly, spears facing outward in every direction, crossbowmen sheltered in the center. All those hours of drilling paid off. The transformation was smooth, almost like real soldiers. A rider charged our left flank. One of my spearmen lunged forward and drove his bamboo pole clean through the man's stomach. He fell screaming from his horse. 2 more riders on the right tried to pull away too late. My men cut them down the same way. 9 riders had circled behind us, planning to hit our unprotected rear. But there was no unprotected rear anymore. I gave the signal. My 15 crossbowmen raised their weapons, loaded 2 bolts each, and fired. At less than 100 meters, the bolts hit like thunder. 8 of the 9 went down in the first volley. The last one tried to run, but caught the second volley and dropped like a pincushion. I swung the crossbows right. 8 more riders on that flank tried to scatter, but they were already inside our 200-meter kill zone. Half fell in the first wave, the rest in the second. Zhao Quan watched all of this from the rear. His hands were shaking so badly, he couldn't hold his reins. His face was pure terror. He'd never seen anything like this. Formation warfare, coordinated volleys, rapid repositioning. This world didn't even have a word for tactical formations yet. I ordered 2 crossbowmen to step outside the circle and shoot his horse. 2 bolts buried themselves in the animal's flank. It screamed, collapsed, and threw Zhao Quan into the dirt. He scrambled to run. I walked out of the formation myself to grab him. But before I could, halt. No armed gatherings permitted in Shenyang County. Violators will be charged with rebellion. A squad of 50 county constables came thundering in, led by their chief, a massive, bearded man called Li Sanhu, the Black Whirlwind. He was infamous across the entire county for his brutality. Zhao Quan screamed from the ground, "Li Sanhu, you're finally here. My uncle sent you." "Zhao Shua, you're finished." His uncle was the county magistrate. Of course, I didn't care. I walked right past the constable chief, grabbed Zhao Quan by the ankle, and spun him in a full circle before dropping him. He passed out cold. Li Sanhu stared at me in disbelief. Nobody had ever ignored him like that. He wanted to arrest me, I could tell, but he had orders to protect Zhao Quan, not start a second fight. He threw Zhao Quan over his horse and rode off with his men, glaring at me the whole way. One of my crossbowmen asked why I hadn't let them shoot the constables too. I explained. Zhao Quan and his thugs were civilians with no official status. Killing them in self-defense was legally clean. But shooting government officers, even corrupt ones, would give them grounds to label us rebels. That was a death sentence I wasn't willing to hand them. The men understood. The battle fever cooled. I turned to Saya with a grin. The main road was open again. I told her to take the transport squad, armed with bamboo spears and armor now, and go by Sultan Town. Miao Shuadwa handed over our last 500 taels. Saya asked if she should also deliver wine and buy more grain while she was there. The blockade was broken. We were back in business. The road was clear, so I put everyone to work. We stripped the dead horses for meat and hide. 21 horses killed or crippled in the battle, plus 45 captured alive, a massive haul. I had the village bring out 20 large stone cooking pots and set them over roaring fires in the village square. Over 800 people gathered for the feast. Thousands of jin of horse meat, bones, and organs went into those pots. Every person could eat 3 to 5 jin, more meat than most of them had seen in months. The mood was electric. People were calling me a war god, saying I was blessed by heaven. I stood on a high spot in the center and told them to eat their fill. Tomorrow we'd slaughter the 11 wounded horses for another round. I felt something powerful in that moment. The loyalty of every person in Bamboo Garden flowing toward me like a current. If I could channel this energy the right way, there was no limit to what we could build. Then Saya came back from town, and her face told me everything. Nobody in town would sell us salt. Every merchant refused the moment they saw who we were. Feng Sihai, the tea trader, secretly sold her 10 jin at 50 taels per jin, double the normal price. He explained that the entire salt supply in Shenyang County was controlled by one family, the Huang clan. And the head of that clan was County Magistrate Huang Wenhua, Zhao Quan's uncle. So the salt blockade wasn't just market manipulation. It was a direct attack ordered from the county government itself. All salt merchants had been told, nothing goes to Bamboo Garden. I wasn't surprised. I'd already suspected this when Zhao Quan mentioned his uncle during the battle, but hearing it confirmed still stung. I told Saya not to worry. 50 taels per jin was robbery, but we had no choice right now. I ordered 5 jin dissolved into the 20 pots of horse meat so everyone could finally get salt into their bodies, and the other 5 jin distributed among the households for daily use. It wasn't enough for long, but it would keep people on their feet. Meanwhile, at the county seat, Zhao Quan was lying on a bed in his uncle's mansion with a broken leg, cursing my name. A doctor warned him that if he moved wrong, he'd be crippled for life. That only made his hatred burn hotter. County Magistrate Huang Wenhua was already planning his next moves. He'd ordered every salt merchant in the county to cut us off. He'd banned me and my people from leaving our territory. And now he was thinking bigger, searching for a legal pretext to arrest me, charge me with a serious crime, petition the border guard king to strip my land and family status, and turn me into a commoner. Once I had no noble protection, he could have me killed in prison however he pleased. The blockade was broken, but a far more dangerous enemy had just entered the game. Zhao Quan was a bully with hired muscle. His uncle was the law itself. 3 days after the battle, everything was too quiet. That silence made me nervous. It felt like the calm before a real storm. I decided to move at night. My destination was Shanyang County City, where Li Dingxian's residence waited for my delivery of liquor and bamboo armor. But I couldn't travel openly. The county magistrate, Zhao Quan's uncle, had turned the entire local government against me. I disguised my men as traveling merchants. We hid 2 jars of wine under baskets of potatoes. The 500 sets of bamboo armor went into wooden crates strapped to the 45 captured warhorses. We set out after dark through the rough back trails behind the mountain. The path was terrible. Thorns and wild grass tore at my legs, leaving bloody scratches. The uneven, muddy ground slowed the horses to a crawl. We left at 9 in the evening and by 3 in the morning had covered only 50 miles out of nearly 70. Then one of my men spotted something ahead, a checkpoint. It hadn't been there before. From the look of the fresh construction, it had been built within the last 3 days, right after my battle with Zhao Quan. The magistrate was already setting traps. I ordered everyone to detour around it. My men complained, 20 extra miles of rough terrain in the dark. But nobody argued when they saw my face. We barely got clear before trouble found us anyway. Torches appeared behind us. Over 100 soldiers from the checkpoint, chasing us with spears drawn. 2 military officers led them, furious at being woken up in the middle of the night. I told my men to kill their lanterns and keep moving. Then I stayed behind alone to buy them time. I hid in the tall grass with my horse and let out my best wolf howl. It worked perfectly. These soldiers were terrified of wolves. The area was known for packs that hunted at night. The 2 officers immediately started making excuses to each other. One claimed his stomach hurt. The other forced out a loud fart to prove he was sick too. They convinced themselves we probably weren't Zhao Shua's people after all, who'd be crazy enough to travel this far in total darkness. They turned around and marched back to their post. I waited until their torches shrank to pinpoints, then mounted up and galloped after my caravan. Half an hour later I caught up. A few men had twisted their ankles. One horse had nearly gotten stuck in a mud pit, but everyone made it. We reached the outskirts of Shanyang County City just over an hour before dawn. The massive gates were shut, nighttime curfew. Guards with torches patrolled the walls above. I told everyone to rest and wait. We'd enter when the gates opened at first light. After nearly 70 miles of night marching through enemy territory, the last thing I'd do was knock on the door early and draw attention to ourselves. The men huddled against the cold. Some were sneezing. Sun Air agreed without complaint. We'd made it this far. Just a little longer. An hour later, dawn broke and the city gates opened. We joined the stream of merchants and farmers flowing in. A gate inspector eyed our caravan suspiciously. Apparently orders had come down to watch for anyone surnamed Zhao transporting wine. I pulled him aside and slipped 5 taels of silver into his hand. He smiled, announced our baskets were full of potatoes, and waved us through. Inside the city, I bought 100 wheat buns and 10 jean of boiled offal for my exhausted men. They tore into it like it was a feast. I could barely choke down a few bites. The food was rock-hard and greasy, just boiled in plain water with a pinch of salt. But for my men, this was luxury dining. We found Li Dingxian's residence in the wealthy northern quarter. The place was impressive. Wide gates, massive stone lions, hitching posts for 10 horses. I showed the Li token to the doorman, and minutes later a well-dressed young man came striding out. His name was Li Hong, Li Dingxian's nephew and the estate's current manager. He was expecting me. His uncle had told him a special guest would arrive with wine and armor, and to treat him with the highest respect. We unloaded in the second courtyard. 40 jars of wine, 25 jean each, 1,000 jean total. Li Hong tasted a bowl, praised it immediately, and handed me 10 banknotes worth 1,000 taels each. 10,000 taels of silver. He suggested I use the banknotes to avoid attracting thieves on the road home. I appreciated the thought, but I had a more urgent need. Can I trade some of this for salt? Li Hong's eyes lit up. He told me something invaluable. The Huang family controlled all salt distribution in Shanyang County, but the Li household had its own independent supply chain. Li Dingxian's military unit consumed large quantities of salt for soldiers, families, and war horses, so he'd secured a separate source years ago. The catch: their current stock was nearly depleted. All they had left was the lowest grade, coarse, bitter salt normally fed to horses. Yellowish, some chunks blackened, crystals as big as small fruits, clumped into hard blocks. Far worse than even the cheapest salt on the market. Sun Air opened a bag and wrinkled his nose at the smell. "This salt is yellow and black," he said, looking at me doubtfully. But I was grinning inside. Everyone in this world saw garbage salt. I saw raw material. With the purification techniques I knew from my old life, I could transform this crude horse salt into fine white salt, the kind that aristocrats paid 100 taels per gene for on the open market. Salt so pure and clean that even noble families couldn't get enough of it. This wasn't just a solution to my people's health crisis. This was potentially the most profitable product I'd discovered yet. Sun Air wrinkled his nose at the crude salt, but I saw gold. I bought the entire stock, 1,000 gene at 10 taels per gene, spending all 10,000 taels from the wine sale. Li Hing thought I was feeding horses. He had no idea I could purify this garbage into fine white salt worth 10 times what I paid. For the bamboo armor, Li Hing was skeptical. He'd never seen anything like it. No metal plates, just woven bamboo. He agreed to forward all 500 sets to his uncle in the capital, but would only pay 5,000 taels up front instead of the full 50,000. I accepted. Once Li Dingxian tested the armor himself, he'd understand its value. Li Hing invited me to stay for dinner and drinks, but I couldn't shake a gnawing unease about leaving Bamboo Garden unprotected. I declined politely, and we left by mid-morning. On the way back, I stopped at a wine estate near the county and bought 2,000 gene of cheap wine for 4,000 taels, 20,000 gene of grain for 600 taels, and some small work cattle for 300 taels. We detoured around the military checkpoint and reached Bamboo Garden's back mountain by late afternoon. Sun Air was thrilled to be home. But the moment I entered the village, something felt wrong. The bamboo forest was empty, no one harvesting. The village streets were deserted. Outside the manor, the neat stacks of processed bamboo strips had been scattered and trampled. The women who'd been weaving armor were gone. Then a door burst open, and a woman ran out screaming that the Lord was back. More doors opened. Villagers poured into the street. Women, young men, elderly, all looking shaken and terrified. Old Li Qing limped toward me, clutching a wounded arm. He told me everything. That morning, the county magistrate had sent soldiers, not constables this time, but a full archery battalion of several hundred men. They'd accused us of manufacturing armor without authorization, which they called treason. They'd arrested all 3 of my wives. The villagers had tried to fight back. Several people died. Dozens were wounded. But bows against farmers was no contest. They'd been overwhelmed. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly what was happening. Under imperial law, the ban on private armor specifically meant metal armor, bronze, or iron plates. Plain cloth padding and bamboo weaving without metal components fell into a gray area that authorities normally ignored. Thousands of people across the empire owned such things. The magistrate was deliberately twisting the law to target me specifically. He'd found his pretext, and he'd taken my wives as leverage. While I'd been away, the worst had happened. My 3 wives were now locked up in the magistrate's mansion. At the Huang estate, Zhao Quan had hobbled in on his crutch, drooling over my wives. He was about to assault Miao Xuedua when his uncle Huang Wenhua walked in and stopped him, not out of decency, but strategy. The women carried massive debts. If Zhao Quan touched them now, he'd legally inherit those debts. Better to wait. Once they destroyed me, the magistrate would petition the border guard king to have the women executed for their original crimes. With execution papers in hand, Zhao Quan could do whatever he wanted to them first. Zhao Quan called his uncle a genius. Then they moved on to business. Huang Wenhua was planning to raise salt prices even higher across the county. Zhao Quan worried it might spark unrest near his horse ranch, but the magistrate dismissed the concern. Common people couldn't fight back. They were just sheep to be sheared. I didn't know these details yet, but I knew enough. My wives were hostages. The charge was treason, manufacturing armor, and the man holding them was the county magistrate himself. Fighting my way in with villagers would be suicide. Even my bamboo spearmen couldn't stand against the county's professional archers, and attacking a government seat would give them the real treason charge they wanted. So I went alone. I walked straight into the county courthouse. A guard ran to inform the magistrate that some young man had barged in demanding to file a lawsuit. The guard said the man claimed the case involved the magistrate personally, and that anyone who threw him out would regret it. The magistrate's first instinct was to have me beaten to death on the spot. But then he hesitated. What if this person had powerful backing? He'd heard of nobles who traveled in disguise. Getting it wrong could mean his whole family's execution. He rushed to the courthouse and took his seat. I was already standing in the center of the main hall when he walked in, surrounded by rows of guards pounding their staffs and shouting, "Order!" He slammed his gavel. "State your name." I looked him dead in the eye. "Zhao Shuo, son of the Zhao clan, lord of the Bamboo Garden territory, under the Border Guard King's authority. And by the way, under Zhao family rules, a member of our house is exempt from kneeling in any court and must be offered a seat. I trust you know the protocol." His face went white. He'd just told his nephew I'd never dare come here. And here I was, outside the courthouse. A crowd of townspeople pressed against the entrance to watch. Zhao Quan had followed his uncle and nearly fell off his crutch when he saw me standing there. And Li Heng, Li Dingxian's nephew, happened to be passing by on an errand. He spotted me through the crowd and stopped, curious to see what I was about to do. Even he could tell the magistrate looked shaken. I had walked into the lion's den, but I hadn't come to fight. I'd come to win. I stood in that courthouse and let Huang Wenhua throw his accusations. Private armor manufacturing. Treason. He slammed his gavel like he'd already won. The crowd outside gasped. An old man said I was finished. A scholar shook his head. Zhao Quan was practically dancing on his crutch. Even Li Heng, watching from the crowd, started sweating. He was already calculating how much money it would take to bribe the magistrate into releasing me. But I hadn't come unprepared. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. "You want to talk about illegal armor? Let's talk about the 500 armed private soldiers you keep hidden in East River Valley. Full metal armor, every one of them. Under imperial law, a non-royal official maintaining over 100 armored troops is treason. 500 or more. Execution of 3 generations." Huang Wenhua's face drained of color. That operation was supposed to be his deepest secret. He stammered that I was lying. I kept going. "Your official salt business is a front. You supply the black market. You sell salt to bandits. And you ship salt to the northern barbarians. That's aiding the enemy, a crime equal to rebellion itself. Before coming here, I'd done my homework. I knew Zhao Quan's father had plenty of enemies within the Border Guard King's household. Through Feng Sihai and a major intelligence trading merchant house, I'd purchased detailed evidence of Huang Wenhua's crimes. It cost me a significant amount of wine, but the information was worth infinitely more. The magistrate panicked and ordered 4 guards to beat me and throw me in the death cell. That's when I played my final card. I've already sent 50 riders on fast horses toward the capital. Each one carries 100 copies of these accusations on printed notices. If I don't return home safely, within days every person in the imperial court will know exactly what you've been doing. Your official hat won't just come off, your head will follow it. Huang Wenhua stared at me. I stared back. We held that gaze for a long time. Then his eyes flickered. He waved the guards back to their positions. A senior guard shouted that the case was too complex and the court was closing. They pushed everyone outside. Li Heng, Zhao Quan, all the spectators, and slammed the doors shut. In a private side room, Huang Wenhua dropped the act entirely. "You win. What do you want?" His eyes were like a snake's, but I could see the fear behind them. I laid out my terms calmly. First, release my 3 wives immediately, all charges dropped. Second, a public statement declaring the armor accusation was a misunderstanding with a formal apology. Third, I wanted Zhao Quan's entire horse ranch. Every asset, every horse, every coin, transferred to me, with the paperwork submitted to the Border Guard King for approval. I'd considered demanding his salt monopoly too, but decided against it. I already had Li Dingxian's supply channel. Taking salt from a man this corrupt was asking to be poisoned. Huang Wenhua stared at me like he wanted to tear me apart, but he agreed to everything. My wives released. Public apology. The horse ranch transferred today, not in a few days, where he'd have time to scheme his way out. Half an hour later, the courthouse doors reopened and the crowd flooded back in. Huang Wenhua stood and formally announced that the armor charges against me were baseless, a misunderstanding, and that he was publicly apologizing for the error. Then he ordered my wives brought in. Yi Qingwen ran to me crying, saying she thought she'd never see me again. Miao Xuedwa's eyes glistened with tears. Saya threw her arms around all of us so hard she nearly knocked me over. I told them I was sorry for arriving late and letting them suffer. The crowd outside was stunned. The magistrate apologizing? Releasing prisoners he'd just accused of treason? People started whispering. Maybe what that young man said in the courtroom was true after all. Zhao Quan was standing in the crowd, frozen in disbelief. His powerful uncle had folded completely. Then he slipped and fell on the ground, unable to get up on his broken leg. The spectators burst out laughing at him. I walked over and crouched beside him. Long time no see, Zhao Quan. Missed you. His face cycled through red and purple. He told me not to get cocky. I smiled and told him the horse ranch was about to become mine, and that I wondered what would happen to him once the border guard king heard about all this. Would he be allowed to rot quietly in the mansion, or would they strip his status and throw him out as a commoner? Zhao Quan's eyes went wide. His psychological defenses shattered. He fainted on the spot. Li Heng watched everything from the crowd, barely containing his excitement. He gave me a subtle nod, which I returned without approaching. I didn't want to publicly link him to me and make him a target for Huang Wenhua's revenge. That same afternoon, I stood inside the horse ranch's grand manor, at least 10 times larger than my place in Bamboo Garden. 48 servants lined up to greet their new master. Zhao Quan, propped on his crutch under his uncle's withering glare, handed over everything. Population records, land maps, warehouse keys, livestock inventories, and financial ledgers. He looked like a defeated rooster, head down, spirit crushed. I took it all. The horse ranch, the horses, the money, the land, the people. Everything Zhao Quan had built was now mine. That evening I settled into the horse ranch manor with my wives. The place was magnificent. Multiple courtyards, 48 servants, stables full of horses, herds of cattle, sheep, and camels grazing on lush grassland. A river ran through the property. It was 5 times larger than Bamboo Garden and incredibly fertile. I'd already cleared out all of Zhao Quan's loyalists. His remaining killers were dismissed, his personal soldiers sent away. In their place, I stationed my 50 armored spearmen, 15 crossbowmen, and 50 additional guards rotating night watch shifts. For dinner, I made something special to comfort my wives after their ordeal: hot pot with lamb. I prepared a bronze pot with my own spice blend, brought the broth to a boil, and dropped in 5 gene of fresh sliced mutton. Yi Qingwen took one bite, and her eyes glowed. Miao Shuedwa did the same. Saya slammed the table and demanded wine. I brought out a special batch, not the distilled stuff I sold, but liquor I'd brewed from scratch using grain, aged in fresh bamboo tubes. The bamboo gave it a clean, crisp fragrance that elevated it above anything I'd made before. Saya drained her bowl, cheeks flushed, and declared it was noticeably better than the commercial batch. Miao Shuedwa was still worried. She reminded me that Huang Wenhua wouldn't forgive this humiliation. Yi Qingwen echoed the concern. We were sleeping in enemy territory. But I prepared for that. This manor was now a fortress. While my wives slept, I stayed up working on the real treasure, that 1,000 gene of crude horse salt from the Li estate. Using chemistry knowledge from my old world, I dissolved the salt in water, then systematically removed the harmful impurities through a series of filtration and chemical separation steps. It took all night. Dissolving took an hour. Purification took over 2. Then I filled every available pot and began boiling the clean brine to evaporate the water and crystallize pure salt. By dawn, the process was underway. I put Sun Air's wife in charge of a team of women to tend the fires and watch the pots, making sure the water boiled off completely without burning the salt. 1,000 gene of crude salt would yield roughly 600 or 700 gene of fine white salt, the kind that sold for at least 100 taels per gene to noble families, and even then was nearly impossible to find. My people needed salt desperately, but the surplus could become one of my most profitable products yet. I was turning horse feed into aristocratic luxury, and nobody in this world had any idea how. I slept until almost noon. The all-night salt work had completely drained me. Then Sun Air's wife burst in, barely able to breathe from excitement. The salt was ready. I rushed to the east wing of the 3rd courtyard. There in the bottom of every pot lay a thick layer of pure white crystals, fine, even, with no trace of the yellow-black grime that had made everyone gag the day before. No bitterness, no strange smell, just clean, bright salt as white as fresh snow. I scooped some with a spatula, turning it over. Perfect. Then Sun Air's wife knelt before me, embarrassed but desperate. Her 3 children were dizzy and falling asleep constantly from salt deficiency. She asked if she could buy just a little crude salt, deducted from her husband's wages. I looked at her, a woman in her 30s, dark circles under her eyes from staying up all night, honest face streaked with sweat. She'd spent the entire night watching those pots for me without complaint. Forget crude salt, I told her. Take a full gene of this fine salt home. And each of you women, take half a gene. They froze. Half a gene of fine salt was worth 50 taels on the open market. They couldn't believe someone like them would ever taste salt this pure. Sun Air's wife dropped to her knees crying, swearing she'd serve me faithfully for life. The other 5 women followed, kowtowing. I didn't stop them. In this feudal world, accepting their gratitude was how trust was built. Lifting them up too casually would only confuse them. I told them I'd slaughter 2 more sheep today, so everyone could have meat. Sun Air's wife hurried home with her gene of salt and 2 gene of lamb. She found her 5-year-old daughter collapsed unconscious on the ground, her 8-year-old son holding her in a panic, and the 2-year-old crying. The girl was severely salt-deprived. Sun Air's wife dissolved a pinch of fine salt in water and poured it into her daughter's mouth. The girl's eyes fluttered open. She looked up at her mother and whispered, "Am I still alive?" That moment told me everything I needed to know about what I was fighting for. This wasn't about money or revenge anymore. My people were dying for want of something I could now produce in abundance. Every pot of white salt I made could save lives, and the surplus would fund everything else. The salt came out perfectly. 800 gene of pure white fine salt from 1,000 gene of crude yellow horse feed. Snow-white crystals, no bitterness, no smell. The kind of salt that noble families fought over at 100 taels per gene. I kept 50 gene for the manor's 200 people, then sent Saya to distribute nearly 400 gene to Bamboo Garden. Half a gene per person for all 850 villagers. My wives couldn't believe I was giving away something this precious. Miao Shiwedwa said it seemed wasteful. I told her only extravagant investment brings extravagant returns. Meanwhile, Sun Air's wife rushed home with her gene of salt and found her 5-year-old daughter had just collapsed from salt deficiency. She dissolved a tiny pinch in water and fed it to the girl. The child opened her eyes and asked if she was still alive. Then her 2 boys drank salt water and came back to life within minutes. When their mother boiled salted lamb soup that afternoon, the 8-year-old promised to drink every last drop and lick the bowl clean. The 2-year-old said he'd lick it too. Over lunch, my wives asked why I wasn't rushing to sell the 1,000 gene of distilled liquor sitting in storage. The truth was, the roads to Shenyang County were too dangerous now. Huang Wenhua would have ambushes waiting at every checkpoint. The last nighttime trip had nearly gone wrong multiple times. I wasn't risking it again so soon. Besides, that specific batch was owed to Feng Sihai. He'd spent 5,000 taels of his own money buying intelligence about the magistrate's crimes from a major information trading house. That information had saved my wives' lives. 1,000 gene of liquor at 10 taels per gene was fair repayment. For fresh income, I had a better idea. The horse ranch sat just 3 miles south of the main road connecting to Shenyang town, a massive trade route where 3 roads converged, wide enough for 3 carts side by side. The foot traffic here was 10 times what Bamboo Gardens Road ever saw. Merchants, soldiers, travelers, all flowing past constantly. I told Sun Air to help me build a roadside stall right there. I'd sell my own brewed premium liquor at 20 taels per gene, along with my cooking. This location was infinitely better than the back mountain trail. A week passed. Business boomed. And then a carrier pigeon landed at Li Heng's estate in Shenyang County, carrying a message from Li Dingxian in the capital. The note read, "The wine is magnificent. I need as much as possible. And the bamboo armor is even better. Send everything you can get." Li Heng's hands trembled as he read it. He'd been skeptical about the armor, but his uncle, a decorated military commander who'd tested thousands of pieces of equipment in his career, was calling it extraordinary. Li Heng thought of me, and for the first time truly understood why his uncle had told him to treat me like the most important person he'd ever meet. While I was busy building my roadside food stall and running the horse ranch, things were moving on both sides of the board without my knowledge. At the Li estate, Li Heng received his uncle's pigeon message and was stunned. Li Dingxian wanted every drop of wine and every suit of bamboo armor I could produce. But I hadn't delivered anything in over a week. The roads were too dangerous. Li Heng paced his study, frustrated. He wanted to do more in Shenyang County, take over the merchant guild, build a coalition against Huang Wenhua. But the magistrate was too entrenched. His power in business, government, and military force dwarfed anything Li Heng could muster locally. Li Heng himself had been a victim once. He'd earned his scholar's degree fair and square, only to have it stolen through identity fraud by someone connected to the corrupt faction Huang Wenhua served. He decided to reach out to me. He sent his steward with generous gifts, 2,000 jin of crude salt for my livestock, 5,000 taels of silver to cover the remaining armor payment, and an invitation to visit Shanyang County when I had time. He wanted to talk about more than just business. Meanwhile, Huang Wenhua was far from beaten. He and Zhao Quan had spent the week at the finest establishment in the county, enjoying themselves. Zhao Quan's leg had healed enough to walk without a crutch. He kept pestering his uncle about revenge, asking why the old fox wasn't doing anything about me. Huang Wenhua smiled his snake smile. A wise man waits for the right moment. I'm deliberately letting him relax, letting his guard drop. That's when the knife goes in cleanest. I've controlled this county for years. You think one boy from a bamboo village can outsmart me? Zhao Quan's eyes lit up. His uncle had a plan. On the way home, Huang Wenhua put on his public performance, riding through the streets in his official sedan chair, surrounded by guards, playing the caring magistrate. When a weeping woman threw herself before his procession begging for justice over her murdered husband, his guards drew swords to chase her away. But Huang Wenhua called out in a warm, fatherly voice, ordering the guards to treat citizens with respect, and asked for her petition to be brought to him. The crowd praised him as a righteous official. I knew none of this yet, but the calm wouldn't last. Huang Wenhua was sharpening his knife, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. And Li Heng was preparing to become something more than just a business partner. The game was getting bigger, and I was right in the center of it. While I didn't know the details yet, Huang Wenhua was already plotting his next move. On his way home from a night out, a desperate pregnant woman threw herself before his sedan chair, begging for justice. Her husband had been beaten to death by his employer over unpaid wages. Huang Wenhua made a grand show of accepting her petition in front of the crowd, playing the compassionate magistrate. But inside his chair, he just glanced at the accused man's name, smirked, and tossed the petition aside. The accused was one of his regular bribe payers. He'd squeeze the man for a few thousand taels to handle the case, pocket the money, and the widow would get nothing. Zhao Quan, to his small credit, suggested letting it go when he realized the woman was pregnant. His uncle sneered and called him soft, said common people were no better than livestock and a few dead ones didn't matter. Then Huang Wenhua revealed his plan against me. North of the horse ranch, there was a government labor camp at Bailin Mountain. Over 800 convicted military criminals with combat training, forced to mine stone and lumber while supposedly suppressing local bandits. In reality, the camp was another of the magistrate's tools. His scheme was elegant in its cruelty. Release these 800 dangerous men and point them at the horse ranch. If they overwhelmed me, he'd label their attack a prison riot, kill or re-enslave the survivors, and reclaim everything. If I fought back and won, he'd charge me with attacking government prisoners, another treason accusation. Either way, he won. Zhao Quan was thrilled. His uncle truly was a venomous old fox. Meanwhile, my roadside stall on the main road near the horse ranch was making incredible money. The location was perfect, a major trade route where multiple roads converged, with 10 times the traffic of any spot I'd used before. Merchants, soldiers, travelers from across the empire stopped to eat and drink. Every day I sold around 500 jin of liquor at 20 taels per jin, nearly 10,000 taels daily. The cost was laughable. 100 jin of grain for 3 taels produced over 50 jin of premium liquor. Each sheep cost 4 or 5 taels, but sold for 50 to 100 after I cooked it. Pure profit on a staggering scale. Then a rider came galloping from Bamboo Garden with a message. 2 men from the Li estate in Shanyang County had arrived looking for me. I knew immediately Li Heng was reaching out. I sent word to bring them to the horse ranch manor and headed back. Something had been nagging at me for days. The silence from Huang Wenhua felt wrong. Too quiet, too deliberate. He was a snake waiting in tall grass. Taking the horse ranch had hurt him, but a man like that didn't just accept defeat. He was planning something, and the longer the silence lasted, the worse it would be when it came. If Li Heng wanted to deepen our partnership, the timing couldn't be better. I needed eyes inside Shenyang County. I needed allies with resources and connections. And I had a feeling Li Heng needed something from me too. The storm was coming. But this time, I intended to see it before it hit. Li Heng's 2 messengers arrived at the horse ranch with generous gifts, 5,000 taels of silver and 2,000 jin of crude salt. They also carried an invitation for me to visit Shenyang County for a private conversation. I accepted the gifts and told them to have Li Heng send his own horse team to pick up the wine. I couldn't risk another nighttime journey through hostile territory. I promised to keep supplying both liquor and bamboo armor, and said I'd visit when the time was right. I gave each messenger a jin of my best wine and several jin of braised lamb for the road. They left grinning like they'd won the lottery. After they left, Miao Shuodwa asked what Li Heng wanted to discuss so urgently that he couldn't put it in a letter. I had my suspicions. Whatever it was big, possibly political, something he couldn't trust to paper or messengers. But right now, I couldn't leave. Last time I went to the county, my wives were kidnapped. The enemy was watching from the shadows, and I needed to stay close to home. Then Miao Shuodwa brought me a problem I hadn't anticipated. She'd taken over managing the horse ranch's daily operations, and the livestock caretakers were reporting trouble. The animals, horses, cattle, sheep, camels, were refusing to eat properly. They needed salt and supplemental feed, and they hadn't had any in nearly 2 weeks. The numbers hit me hard. 620 adult war horses, 530 younger ones, all needing about 2 ounces of salt per day. That alone was over 200 jin daily. Then 3,000 cattle, 20,000 sheep, and 360 camels, each needing close to an ounce daily. Another 2,000 jin. At 10 taels per jin for crude salt, feeding the animals cost over 40,000 taels per day. My daily income of 10,000 taels from the roadside stall suddenly looked tiny. Under Zhao Quan, this hadn't been a problem. He'd gotten free low-grade salt through his uncle's network and funded the rest through black market profits. I had none of those channels. I ordered the 2,000 jin Li Heng had just delivered sent straight to the herders for emergency use. Then I told Sun Heir to slaughter 50 sheep for tonight's dinner. If I couldn't afford to feed the animals, I'd have to eat them. But even with nearly 4,000 people between Bamboo Garden and the horse ranch, we couldn't consume livestock fast enough to solve the problem. I needed a real solution, and fast. Meanwhile, at the government labor camp on Balin Mountain, 800 convicted soldiers were training in the yard, shirtless, muscular, dangerous men doing combat drills. Among them was a giant named Zhang Biao, a former military captain from the capital who'd been exiled for standing up to corrupt nobles. He could shatter wooden posts with a single spear thrust and send heavy sandbags flying with a sweep of his weapon. These were the men Huang Wenhua planned to unleash on me. 800 trained killers, pointed at my home like a loaded cannon. I didn't know about Zhang Biao yet, but I could feel the danger growing, like distant thunder rolling closer. The magistrate was playing a longer game now, and whatever he had planned would make everything before look like a warm-up. At the government labor camp, things were exactly as Huang Wenhua had planned. The 800 convicted soldiers were already furious. Their food had been deliberately cut. What arrived was barely edible, sorghum with the husks still on and watery gruel with no rice in sight. Men who spent all day mining, chopping lumber, and fighting bandits were being fed like animals. Their leaders were 3 sworn brothers. The eldest, Yang Sun, was a former cavalry soldier, calm, intelligent, with piercing eyes and deadly skill with a long-handled bronze sword. He'd been framed by corrupt officials for refusing to do their dirty work. The second, Zhang Biao, was a mountain of a man, a former captain from the capital, exiled for standing up to powerful nobles. His spear could shatter tree stumps. The third, Zhao Si, nicknamed Water Glider, was thin, wiry, and impossibly fast, with a scheming mind behind his weasel-like face. When the 2 constables delivered the insult of a meal, Zhang Biao nearly killed them on the spot. Yang Sun held him back. Then the constables delivered Huang Wenhua's message. The county was short on funds, but there was a horse ranch nearby run by a local thug, with plenty of cattle and sheep. If the soldiers wanted to eat, they were welcome to go take what they needed. Zhang Biao's rage instantly transformed into excitement. A fight and free meat? He was in. Yang Sun sensed the trap. Why would the magistrate suddenly point them at someone else's property? It didn't feel right. But his brothers were hungry and determined, and all 800 men were ready to march. He decided to go along to protect them from whatever was really going on. The next morning, I'd barely opened my roadside stall when I saw them coming. 800 shirtless, tattooed warriors marching in tight formation down the road, kicking up clouds of dust, radiating killing intent. 2 giants led the way, one with a massive sword, one with a spear that looked like it could punch through a wall. My customers panicked. People fell off their stools. Sun Air's face went white. Before I could react, I noticed something else. A skinny man had appeared at my table out of nowhere, casually eating one of my lamb legs like he'd been sitting there all along. I hadn't seen him arrive. I hadn't even felt him take the meat. That kind of speed and stealth meant one thing. This man was a genuine martial artist. Sun Air lunged forward to confront the thief, but I grabbed his arm and stopped him. This wasn't someone Sun Air could handle, and losing a loyal man over a lamb leg was stupid. Then the big one with the spear, Zhang Biao, dropped onto a stool in front of me, his voice booming with hostility. "You're the one who took the horse ranch? Zhao Shuo, that's me. What can I do for you?" he sneered. "What can you do? Today I came to wreck you. But first, bring me meat and let me eat my fill. Then we'll talk." 800 armed, starving, angry men stood behind him, and 3 dangerous fighters sat at my table. Huang Wenhua's trap had arrived at my doorstep. Zhang Biao pulled his spear from the ground. The blade had sunk several feet into packed earth like it was butter, and swung it in a whistling arc, stopping the tip 1 inch from the spot between my eyes. Everyone around me screamed. My men froze. Sun Air tried to rush forward, but his legs wouldn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood perfectly still and looked straight into Zhang Biao's enormous eyes. Not because I wasn't scared, my heart was pounding, but because I understood something about men like him. They respected courage, not submission. Bowing to a bully only invited more abuse. Standing firm earned respect. The quiet one, Yang Sun, watched me with sharp, calculating eyes. I could feel him reading me like a book. The skinny thief, Zhao Si, had appeared next to Yang Sun, still gnawing on my stolen lamb leg, studying me with that weasel face of his. I spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "Your spear is sharp, but using it to rob and bully unarmed people, is that what a real warrior does? The Empire has enemies at the northern border who burn our villages and slaughter our people. If I had your strength, I'd be out there fighting them, bleeding for something that mattered. Not standing here with a thick face, stealing meat from a roadside stall." Every word hit Zhang Biao like a hammer. His face turned red. His eyes lost their menace. He threw his spear to the ground. "Who told me this guy was a thug? This is a real man." He couldn't even look at me. He mumbled something about coming back another day to apologize properly, carrying thorns on his back, or something. Zhao Si corrected him from the sideline. "It's called apologizing with a thorn bundle, brother." Then Yang San stood up. He walked over to me, and for the first time I saw warmth in those deep, penetrating eyes. "Young brother, you are truly a remarkable person." He clasped his hands and bowed. I told him I was nobody special, just a man trying to make a living who believed in speaking honestly. Zhang Biao turned around and shouted at his 800 men, who were still squatting around hoping for free food. "Get up, you idiots. Help this man with his work." For the next hour, 800 convicted soldiers, the very weapon Huang Wenhua had aimed at me, helped my staff serve customers, carry supplies, and clean up the stall. The terrified merchants who'd been hiding under tables crawled out and went back to drinking. Then Yang Sun clasped his hands again and said they'd be leaving, with a promise to visit me properly another day. Huang Wenhua had sent these men to destroy me. Instead, I'd turned them into something else entirely. Zhang Biao, Yang Sun, and Zhao Si, 3 exceptional fighters with hundreds of loyal soldiers behind them, had walked away respecting me. The magistrate's trap hadn't just failed. It had handed me exactly what I needed most, potential allies with real military power. I wasn't about to let these men walk away. Not when fate had just dropped exactly what I needed right into my lap. "Why leave so soon? You came for meat. Let's eat properly." Yang Sun hesitated, embarrassed about the whole situation, but Zhang Biao lit up immediately. Zhao Si grinned his weasel grin and agreed. When all 800 men behind them shifted eagerly, Yang Sun gave in. I left Sun Air to run the stall and led the entire group to a spot deep in the horse ranch's grasslands, beside a stream. We slaughtered 2 fat cattle, over 600 gene of meat each, and loaded it all into 2 massive bronze pots with salt and my secret spice blend. While the beef simmered, we sat in the grass drinking my finest wine and talking. The view was beautiful, herds grazing in the distance, fresh air, the sound of running water. It felt like something out of a painting. Yang Sun apologized deeply for the morning's confrontation, scolding Zhang Biao for nearly skewering me with his spear. Zhang Biao downed 3 bowls of wine as self-punishment, nearly 30 taels worth, then got embarrassed when Yang Sun pointed out the price. I waved it off and told them meeting people like them was worth far more than silver. When the meat was ready, 800 starving men fell upon it like they hadn't eaten in months, because they practically hadn't. Zhang Biao devoured an entire rack of beef ribs in seconds. Zhao Si ate daintily, but with unmistakable pleasure. Yang Sun maintained his dignified composure even while chewing enormous mouthfuls. The soldiers were openly weeping with gratitude. Some said they hadn't tasted meat in over a year, all because Huang Wenhua skimmed their food budget down to nothing. Then Yang Sun turned serious. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Brother, be careful. That corrupt magistrate told us you were a criminal thug to trick us into attacking you. This scheme failed, but he'll try something else soon." Zhang Biao ripped his mouth from a piece of beef and roared, "I say we storm the county seat and chop that dog official's head off." I shook my head. Killing a county magistrate is rebelling against the empire itself. We can't do that. But fighting back against a corrupt official? That's different. The method matters. We need to make him suffer without giving him any excuse to call us rebels. Hit him where it hurts, but leave no fingerprints. Yang Sen's eyes blazed. He leaned forward. "Brother, tell us what to do. My brothers and I will follow your lead." In one morning, Huang Wenhua's 800 attack dogs had become my 800 allies. 3 sworn warrior brothers with real combat skills had pledged themselves to my cause. I hadn't spent a single tael on recruitment, just 2 cows, some wine, and the truth. The magistrate had no idea what he'd just created. I leaned in close and whispered my plan to the 3 brothers. It was a scheme to publicly expose Huang Wenhua's hypocrisy and strip away the mask of a caring magistrate he wore in front of the people. Once the citizens of Shanyang County saw what he truly was, he'd lose the one thing that protected corrupt officials, the illusion of legitimacy. Yang Sen's face broke into a rare grin. "Brilliant." Zhang Biao slammed down another bowl of wine and roared with laughter. Zhao Si clapped his hands, his weasel eyes sparkling with delight. I told them to eat their fill. 2 entire cows, over 1,000 gene of beef, but warned them not to take any food back to camp. If Huang Wenhua's spies saw them carrying my livestock, he'd know we were connected. For now, secrecy was everything. They could come to the horse ranch whenever they wanted to eat, and I'd always welcome them. The 800 men devoured every last scrap of meat. Then Yang Sun gathered them up and marched them back to Bailin Mountain, promising to return soon. That night, at the Huang estate, the magistrate and Zhao Quan waited anxiously for their spy's report. Zhao Quan was pacing the room, fantasizing about me being beaten beyond recognition. Huang Wenhua sat calmly sipping tea, supremely confident. He bragged that in all his years running Shanyang County, every enemy he'd targeted ended up with grass growing over their grave. He also gloated about my livestock problem. Without his family's free salt supply and cheap grain from their exploitative tax system, the horse ranch's animals would slowly starve, turning my prize acquisition into a millstone around my neck. Then their spy, Wang Deben, returned from Bailin Mountain with his report. He'd followed Yang Sen's group all day. Yes, there'd been a confrontation at first. Zhang Biao had even pointed his spear at my face. But then, somehow, everyone started getting along. I'd taken them into the horse ranch for several hours, and they'd come back saying they'd eaten well, and that was that. Mission accomplished, for them, at least. Zhao Quan grabbed the spy by the collar in fury. Huang Wenhua slapped his nephew down and dismissed the spy with 50 taels for his trouble. Zhao Quan demanded to know what they'd do next. Huang Wenhua's confident mask didn't crack, but behind those snake eyes, I knew he was recalculating. His 800-man trap had failed completely. His livestock starvation strategy was working slowly, but not fast enough. And I was still standing, still earning, still growing stronger. He'd called me prey that couldn't escape, but the prey was making friends, building alliances, and getting ready to bite back. My plan was already in motion. Before Yang's son and his brothers left the horse ranch that day, I'd given them specific instructions. Go back to the county, lie low, and watch Huang Wenhua's movements. Wait for him to slip up. The man wore a mask of righteousness in public, but underneath he was rotten, and rotten men always expose themselves if you're patient enough. 2 days later, Huang Wenhua posted an official notice announcing he'd be traveling to Shanghai town to inspect local conditions and serve the people. The notice said all court business would be suspended for 3 to 4 days. Li Heng saw the notice on the street and scoffed. He knew perfectly well this inspection was a cover for something else. Every time Huang Wenhua made these announcements, he disappeared for days doing things no public servant should be doing. But Li Heng had tried to expose him before and failed every time. The magistrate was too slippery, always denying everything and turning accusations back on his accusers. Meanwhile, my 3 new allies were already in position. Yang San, Zhang Biao, and Zhao Si had infiltrated the county wearing straw hats to hide their branded faces. When the notice went up, Yang San nodded to his brothers. The dog official is making his move. Stick to the plan. Zhao Si, the fastest, stealthiest of the 3, was given the critical job. 2 days later, he crept across the rooftops of the Huang estate like a shadow, so quick and silent that none of the dozens of servants below noticed a thing. He spotted Huang Wenhua and Zhao Quan dressed in plain clothes, sneaking through the grounds. They ducked behind a decorative rock garden and vanished through a hidden door concealed by a mechanical switch. Zhao Si found the mechanism, triggered it, and followed them through. The secret passage led to a small house in a remote corner of the city's North District. From there, Huang Wenhua and Zhao Quan walked straight into the back door of Tsuhua Tower, the most expensive brothel in Shanyang County. A madam in green was waiting for them, gushing about how the magistrate's favorite girl had been so lonely without him. Huang Wenhua casually handed her a 1,000-tael banknote without even looking at her. Zhao Quan sneered and went off to find his own woman. Zhao Si watched and listened from the rooftop above, grinning from ear to ear. Got you, he whispered. Finally caught this dog official's tail. This was what I'd been counting on. Not violence, not confrontation, evidence. The kind of evidence that would shatter the magistrate's carefully constructed image as a devoted public servant. He told the people he was sacrificing his time to inspect their living conditions. In reality, he was spending public money on prostitutes while a pregnant widow begged at his feet for justice. When the people of Shanyang County learned the truth, Huang Wenhua's armor of respectability would crack beyond repair. And unlike a sword wound, a blow to reputation couldn't be stitched shut. I wasn't there to see it myself, but Yang San told me everything afterward, and it was exactly how I'd drawn it up. While Huang Wenhua was holed up in the brothel on his fake inspection trip, Yang San and Zhang Biao rode through every village within a few miles of the county seat, recruiting people. The pitch was simple: 1 tael of silver per person for less than a day's easy work. In a region where most farmers couldn't earn a tael in a month, volunteers practically trampled each other to sign up. Village after village, the numbers climbed. 500 here, 800 there. They paid each group a portion up front to prove the money was real, then directed everyone to gather at the Dragon King Temple in the county's quiet North District, a rundown, abandoned area less than a mile from the brothel. By the time Yang San and Zhang Biao arrived at the meeting point, over 10,000 people had assembled. 10,000. Zhang Biao had never seen a crowd that large in his life. He was simultaneously thrilled and pained. 10,000 taels of my money flowing out like water. But Yang San reminded him that great undertakings require bold spending, and this money was an investment worth every coin. Zhao Si had been keeping watch at the temple, growing nervous as the crowd swelled. A gathering this size in a deserted neighborhood wouldn't stay hidden forever. If guards or officials spotted them before the plan launched, everything would collapse. Then Yang San and Zhang Biao appeared around the corner. Zhao Si nearly jumped out of his skin with relief. "Follow me," Yang San shouted. 10,000 people surged forward in a human wave, pouring through the narrow streets toward the brothel. The madam standing at the front door tried to charge Yang San an entrance fee. He walked past her without a word. She screamed for her bouncers. 20 thugs with clubs rushed out. They took one look at the ocean of humanity flooding through the gates and dropped their weapons, scrambling to escape. Yang's son grabbed one and threw him into the air. Top floor, fourth room, Zhao Si called out. Top floor, fourth room. Go, Yang's son roared. The crowd didn't know why and didn't care. They were being paid. They stampeded up the stairs. The door to the fourth room exploded inward. Huang Wenhua, the magistrate who'd told his citizens he was traveling to inspect their living conditions, was lying in bed with the brothel's most expensive courtesan. 10,000 witnesses stared at him. The courtesan screamed. Huang Wenhua sat bolt upright, face frozen in absolute horror. My plan had cost 10,000 taels. But the look on that corrupt snake's face? Priceless. His mask was shattered forever, and every person in Shanyang County would know exactly what kind of man their caring magistrate really was. Yang's son told me every detail afterward, and it played out even better than I'd hoped. When the crowd burst into the fourth-floor room, the courtesan panicked and screamed that it was the county magistrate, blowing his cover before he could even react. Huang Wenhua grabbed a piece of clothing to hide his face, but it was far too late. Hundreds of people were already staring at him, recognizing his face, connecting the dots. The room erupted. People shouted that he'd lied about inspecting the town, that every fact-finding trip had been a cover for visiting brothels, that he was a fraud, a hypocrite, a dog official wearing a human mask. Then Yang Sen's voice boomed from outside. It's too dark in there. You might be mistaken. Carry this criminal out into the daylight so everyone can see clearly. A young man grabbed Huang Wenhua's leg. This wasn't just any bystander. His wife had died because the magistrate had sided with a wealthier opponent in a court case. He'd been carrying that rage for months with nowhere to aim it. Now, fate had put his enemy right in front of him, half naked and helpless. Huang Wenhua begged them to at least let him put on his pants. The young man laughed in his face. A dog like you still cares about dignity? He pulled Huang Wenhua off the bed so hard the magistrate's backside hit the floor. Then Zhang Biao, who'd been barely contained by Zhao Si sitting on his shoulders, finally broke free, charged in, slapped Huang Wenhua across the face several times, grabbed him by the waist, and dragged him across the rough wooden floor. Splinters tore into the magistrate's skin, leaving a trail of blood. Outside in the courtyard, they tied him to a wooden post. Someone found his pants on the floor, trampled beyond recognition under hundreds of muddy footprints. But the jade pendant attached to them was unmistakable, engraved with the character Huang. Explain this, dog official. Huang Wenhua had nothing to say. Then a dozen men hauled Zhao Quan out from deeper inside the brothel, half-dressed and terrified, and threw him on the ground beside his uncle. Zhao Quan immediately admitted his identity. He wasn't brave enough to deny it with an angry mob standing over him. Huang Wenhua heard his nephew's confession and closed his eyes. The last thread of deniability had snapped. The madam tried to escape, but Zhao Si caught her instantly, and she confirmed everything too, pointing at Huang Wenhua and identifying him by name. Over 10,000 witnesses. The magistrate of Shanyang County, exposed as a lying, corrupt hypocrite who spent public time and public money on prostitutes while his citizens suffered. No amount of power or connections could bury this. The story would spread through every village, every market, every tavern in the region within days. My plan had cost 10,000 taels. It had purchased something money couldn't normally buy, the complete destruction of a powerful enemy's reputation. And the best part? Not a single law had been broken. No violence against officials. No rebellion. Just a crowd of ordinary people who happened to walk into a building and saw something they weren't supposed to see. Huang Wenhua would survive this day, but his authority, the fear and respect that made his corruption possible, was gone forever. The news reached me at the horse ranch through Yang Sen's report. Everything had gone perfectly. Over 10,000 people saw Huang Wenhua tied half-naked to a post in a brothel courtyard. The story spread through the county like wildfire. People who'd believed his inspection trips now understood the truth. Every time he'd claimed to be serving the public, he'd been spending their tax money on prostitutes. Villagers, merchants, farmers, everyone was talking about it. His reputation wasn't just damaged. It was destroyed. Yang San, Zhang Biao, and Zhao Si slipped away cleanly before the constables arrived, retrieved their hidden horses, and rode out of the county without being identified. That evening at the Huang estate, Both uncle and nephew lay face down on a bed being treated for injuries. Zhao Quan screamed and cursed with every touch of the medicine. Huang Wenhua didn't make a single sound. When the doctor left and Zhao Quan asked his uncle how he could endure such pain in silence, Huang Wenhua opened his mouth. Several teeth fell out, covered in blood. He'd been biting down so hard he'd shattered them. Blood filled his mouth and dripped down his chin. "I will have my revenge," he said, eyes burning red. "Or I'm not fit to be called a man." The physical pain wasn't what tormented him. It was the knowledge that his carefully built public image, years of fake benevolence, staged inspection tours, strategic reputation management, had been ripped away in a single afternoon. He was now the laughingstock of Shenyang County and beyond. No citizen would trust him again. Business partners would distance themselves. His power base was crumbling. He quickly figured out who was responsible. Not Li Heng, too timid. Not any of the local merchants. None had the nerve. Only one person in the entire county had both the boldness and the cunning to orchestrate something this devastating. "Zhao Shua," he hissed through bloody teeth. Zhao Quan was stunned. He'd underestimated me again. This wasn't a sword strike or a cavalry charge. It was something far more lethal. A single move that stripped away the one thing a corrupt official needed most, the appearance of virtue. A constable came in to report. Over 10,000 participants, each paid 1 tael of silver. The organizers had vanished without a trace. 10,000 taels, Huang Wenhua whispered. Quite the investment. His eyes were like a wounded animal's, cornered, bleeding, and infinitely more dangerous than before. I'd humiliated him beyond recovery. That meant he had nothing left to lose. I knew this wasn't over. A snake with nothing to lose doesn't retreat. It strikes with everything it has. Whatever came next would be Huang Wenhua's most desperate and most dangerous move yet. But for now, the people of Shenyang County finally saw their magistrate for what he truly was. And that was worth every tael. That night, Yang's son, Zhang Biao, and Zhao Si came to the horse ranch for a celebration feast. I roasted a whole lamb over an open fire, coated in my secret spice blend, and brought out my finest grain-brewed liquor. The operation had been flawless. The people who'd physically dragged Huang Wenhua out of bed had already been evacuated. I'd arranged for them and their extended families, over 300 people total, to be quietly relocated before the constables could track them down. When the authorities came knocking, the houses were empty. The magistrate's investigators had hit a dead wall. Li Heng, watching from the sidelines, was overjoyed without knowing who was behind it. He celebrated alone at his estate, cursing himself for not having any of my good wine left to toast with. As we ate and drank under the stars, the conversation turned serious. Zhang Biao, mouth full of lamb, suddenly declared that I wasn't just a little brother to them anymore. I was their leader. Yang Sun agreed, but took it further. "We should call you Master, our Lord. It's not about age or title. It's about your courage and your mind. I've never met anyone like you." Zhang Biao slammed his bowl down. "Say the word, and I'll charge through fire for you without blinking." Even Zhao Si dropped his usual smirk. He said he'd spent his whole life drifting, petty theft, gambling, chasing women, with no purpose. Being exiled had crushed whatever hope he had left, but meeting me had changed that. For the first time, he could see a future worth fighting for. I accepted, but I set the terms clearly. 3 rules they had to follow, and absolute obedience to my commands. No more reckless charging in without orders. All 3 knelt before me on the ground and bowed deeply. Yang Sun led. Zhang Biao and Zhao Si flanked him. It was a formal pledge of loyalty, the kind that in this world meant everything. I told them to rise. They were mine now. For their reward, I gave each of them 50 fat sheep. I couldn't hand them silver. Carrying money back to the labor camp would raise suspicion, but sheep they could explain. Whether they ate them or sold them was their business. Truthfully, the sheep served another purpose. My livestock problem was still crushing me. Without enough salt and feed, thousands of animals were slowly deteriorating. Every sheep I could move off the ranch, through sales, feasts, or gifts, reduced the burden. I was selling 100 daily at the market, slaughtering 50 per day for my people, and cooking more at the roadside stall. But sitting there with 3 sworn warriors eating roast lamb and drinking under the night sky, the livestock crisis felt like a problem that could wait until morning. Tonight, I had something more valuable than silver or sheep. I had generals. The next morning, Li Hang's hired mule caravan arrived to pick up the wine. 100 pack animals. They'd traveled through the night. I housed them in the empty courtyards that used to be Zhao Quan's training grounds, then supervised the loading. For 1,000 jin of my finest liquor, packed and counted by Saya and Sun Air, I kept 300 jin for personal use and entertaining guests. Everything else went with the caravan. Before the caravan leader left, I wrote a sealed letter to Li Hang. I couldn't say what I needed out loud. If word leaked about my salt supply route through the Li estate, Huang Wenhua would find a way to cut it off. In the letter, I asked Li Hang to convert the entire payment for the wine, 80,000 taels, into crude salt and ship it to me as fast as possible. The math was brutal. At 10 taels per jin, 80,000 taels bought only 8,000 jin of salt. My livestock consumed thousands of jin per day. 8,000 jin would last barely a few days. But it was better than nothing, and I needed to keep the animals alive long enough to restructure the operation. My immediate strategy was to reduce the herd. Sheep were the least valuable, lowest strategic worth, highest salt consumption relative to their usefulness. I was already slaughtering 50 daily for my people's meals, selling 100 at the market, and cooking more at the roadside stall. Every sheep I moved off the ranch freed up salt for the horses and cattle that actually mattered. That morning, I selected 100 fat sheep and headed to the livestock market in Shanghai town with Saya and 20 men. I sent Saya off with 2,000 taels to buy 500 jin of cheap wine and 2,000 jin of bean meal for animal feed. At the market, I paid my stall fee and set up in a livestock pen. 5 taels per sheep, a fair price. My men started calling out to attract buyers. Then trouble walked over. A local official, some petty market inspector, marched up with 5 underlings and a nasty grin. "You're Zhao Shua from the horse ranch." I knew immediately where this was going. He announced I wasn't allowed to trade here and that he was confiscating my livestock. His reasoning: the sheep came from the horse ranch, which was border guard king territory, and I didn't have the official transfer documents proving the ranch was legally mine. One of my young men from Bamboo Garden stepped forward shouting about fairness and the law, but I handled it myself. I raised my voice so every bystander in the market could hear. I don't have the horse ranch documents on me, but I do have the official seal for Bamboo Garden, my original territory granted by the border guard king himself. Which eye of yours can prove these sheep came from the horse ranch and not Bamboo Garden? Show me your evidence. If you can prove it, take not just 100 sheep, take 1,000. The crowd murmured in support. Several people gave me thumbs up. The inspector had nothing, no proof, no paperwork, just orders from above to make my life difficult. Huang Wenhua's revenge had already begun, not with soldiers or charges this time, but with 1,000 small cuts, bureaucratic harassment at every turn, designed to strangle my business slowly. Every official in Shanyang County had apparently received the message: make things hard for Zhao Shua. The road ahead was going to be rougher than ever, but I'd faced worse odds with less, and I was still standing. The market inspector left with his tail between his legs. He had no evidence and no comeback. My Bamboo Garden territory seal was legitimate, and he couldn't prove where the sheep came from. My young men from Bamboo Garden were grinning and mocking him as he walked away. He threw one last thread over his shoulder, but it was empty. While I was selling sheep, I spotted a familiar face, Feng Sihai, the tea merchant who'd been my very first customer. He'd arrived with over 100 horses from the northern tribes, planning to sell them at the market. He grabbed my arm the moment he saw me, insisting we go drink at his tavern. I told him I was busy but promised to send him a fresh batch of wine soon. He noticed my 100 sheep and bought them all on the spot. 500 taels, no haggling. For him, it was pocket change. His tavern spent that much on ingredients daily. For me, every tael counted. Then I noticed his horses. Real horses, tall, long-bodied, with powerful legs built for endurance and speed. Our empire's local breeds were short-legged and thick-necked, useless compared to what the northern nomads rode. That gap in horse quality was one reason we kept losing border wars. Feng Sihai reminded me he still owed me a horse from our original deal. He'd originally promised a basic 100-tael horse, but now he told me to pick any horse I wanted. Up to 300 taels, his treat. I walked straight past the cheaper horses and stopped in front of the ungelded stallions. Most of the herd were mares or geldings, but about a dozen were intact males, larger, prouder, and far more valuable because they could breed. One horse stood apart from all the rest, pure black, coat shining like polished metal, bigger than every other horse there. He held himself like a king, alert, fierce, untamed. A horse among horses. That one, I said. Feng Sihai's eyes widened. That's the herd leader, a true horse king. I captured him from a nomad chief's personal stock. Cost me a fortune. I was planning to sell him for 10,000 taels. I didn't hesitate. I'll take him. I'll send you 1,000 jin of my best wine as payment. 1,000 jin at 10 taels per jin was exactly 10,000 taels. Feng Sihai agreed immediately. This horse king was worth far more than his price. At my horse ranch, surrounded by hundreds of local mares, he'd produce offspring that inherited his speed, stamina, and size. Within a few generations, I could develop an entirely new breed, horses that could actually compete with what the nomads rode. Even selling the foals would bring enormous returns. But more importantly, if war ever came, and in this empire, war always came, my cavalry wouldn't be riding into battle on inferior animals. I walked up to the black stallion and looked him in the eye. He snorted and stamped, but didn't back away. Neither did I. We understood each other. I rode back to the horse ranch leading the black stallion, with my men each bringing one of the 16 horses I'd acquired. Miao Shuedwa was outside the manor supervising a group of women milking the ranch's dairy cows. She looked confused when she saw me arrive with more horses instead of fewer animals. Yi Qingwen pointed out that horses consumed even more salt and feed than sheep. But I had my reasons. I was restructuring the entire ranch, cutting the low-value sheep herd while investing in high-quality breeding stock. These stallions, crossed with our local mares, would produce offspring worth far more than any sheep. The Black Horse King alone could transform the quality of our entire cavalry line within a few generations. Then I noticed what my wives had been doing. They'd come up with their own plan to help, milking the cows and selling the milk to wealthy families in town at 20 taels per jin. With 100 jin daily from a dozen cows, that was 2,000 taels. They could trade it for salt at 25 taels per jin. Not enough to solve our crisis, but a real contribution. I told them the idea was smart. Then I told them not to do it. After explaining what had happened at the livestock market that morning, the official harassment, the attempted confiscation, their faces fell. In the current environment, sending milk into town would just give corrupt officials another target. They could tamper with the product, extort the buyers, or seize the goods entirely. We'd lose more than we'd gain. Miao Shuedwa apologized for almost causing trouble. But her initiative actually sparked a better idea in my head. Milk itself was risky to sell directly, but what about processed milk products? In the summer heat that was building, something cold and sweet made from milk, like the frozen cream desserts from my old world, would be irresistible. Something I could sell at my own roadside stall on my own territory, bypassing the town's officials entirely. I kept that plan to myself for now and went inside to cook lunch. Saya unloaded the supplies, 1,000 jin of cheap wine for distilling and 2,000 jin of premium animal feed. I ordered the feed reserved exclusively for the horses and our best military mares. Regular horses would have to make do with grass. But while I was planning and building, the other side was tightening the noose. Back in Shanghai town, the local officials were holding a meeting. The market inspector who'd confronted me was complaining about how I'd outmaneuvered him. The town chief, the highest-ranking official in Shanghai town, had already received Huang Wenhua's orders. His new decree was simple and devastating. From now on, Zhao Shua and anyone associated with him was banned from entering Shanghai town entirely. Not just the livestock market, not just the salt shops, the entire town, cut off from the biggest commercial center in the region. The walls were closing in. But I'd been cornered before, and every time, I'd found a door nobody else could see. This time would be no different. After lunch, I spent 3 hours distilling the 1,000 jin of cheap wine into 500 jin of premium liquor. Then I came out wiping sweat and noticed the buckets of fresh milk sitting in the heat. They'd spoil fast in this weather. That's when the idea crystallized. I remembered something in the back garden of the manor, a pile of unusual white stones that nobody here knew the purpose of. But I recognized them immediately. Saltpeter. In my old world, saltpeter dissolved in water absorbs heat and creates ice. This era had no concept of artificial ice making. Nobody here had ever experienced cold anything in summer. I grabbed the saltpeter, the milk, and 10 gene of black sugar from our stores, then got to work in a side room. The process was simple. Pour the milk into large basins of water, stir thoroughly, add saltpeter to freeze everything solid, then layer black sugar on top. Half an hour later, I had buckets and basins full of frozen milk ice, sweet, creamy, ice cold. I crushed a piece with a wooden stick, creating a bowl of milk ice shavings dusted with dark sugar. Sweet, cold, rich with cream flavor. In this brutal summer heat, it was pure heaven. I carried a bowl to my wives, who were lying on the bed drenched in sweat, fanning themselves uselessly. Saya tasted it first. Her eyes went huge. She started shoveling it into her mouth without stopping. Miao Shuadwa took the bowl next. She'd eaten every luxury imaginable growing up in a marquee household, but she'd never encountered anything like frozen dessert in summer. She was speechless. Yi Qingwen couldn't stop after her first bite. "Did you make this?" Miao Shuadwa asked in disbelief. I told her yes. Made from the same milk she'd been planning to sell this morning. Then I asked the real question. Could we sell it? Absolutely, she said without hesitation. Rich people would go insane for this. That was all I needed to hear. 100 gene of milk plus 400 gene of water made over 500 gene of ice dessert. 2 servings per gene at 5 taels each meant potentially 5,000 taels from milk that would have spoiled by evening. I told Saya to load everything onto a cart and take 10 men to our roadside stall on the main highway. It was mid-afternoon, the hottest part of the day. Every traveler on that road would be desperate for something cold. Saya jumped off the bed, gathered her team, loaded the frozen tubs onto a cart surrounded by extra ice blocks to keep them solid, and headed north. I'd been banned from Shanghai town, but my stall sat on the main road, on my own territory. The town chief's band couldn't touch me there, and in this heat, the customers would come to me. Ice cream in a world that had never seen ice in summer. Another product that existed nowhere else, invented by me, sold by me, controlled entirely by me. Huang Wenhua could block the town. He could harass my merchants. He could turn every petty official against me. But he couldn't stop people from wanting what nobody else could offer. The heat was brutal that afternoon. Perfect timing. I set up a banner at the roadside stall, fresh milk sweet ice. Then I waited. A group of merchants and landowners rode by, sweating miserably under the blazing sun. One of them, a landowner named Han, spotted my sign and couldn't believe it. Ice. In summer? His companion dismissed it as a scam. But Han rode over anyway, desperate for anything cool. The moment he approached the stall, he felt the cold air drifting from the ice-packed cart. His eyes went wide. Here was the key to my plan. I wasn't selling for silver. I was trading. 1 bowl of milk ice cost 2.5 gene of crude salt, or 20 gene of black sugar. In silver terms, that was about 5 to 6 taels per bowl, affordable for the wealthy, and it brought me exactly the supplies I needed most. Han hesitated at first. Then he tasted it. First bite, shock. Second bite, pure pleasure. Third bite, he was hooked. He ordered 10 more bowls for his family and asked if I could make the ice chunks bigger for transport. I told him I also sold plain ice blocks in bulk. 1 gene of salt per gene of ice, or 90 gene of salt for 100 gene of ice wholesale. The other merchants and landowners crowding behind him went wild. They started shouting orders over each other. 100 gene of ice here, 200 there. Some wanted ice for their homes. Others with business sense realized they could resell flavored ice in town. Then word reached Shanghai town itself. Within the hour, crowds of wealthy residents, men, women, entire families, came pouring out of the town gates on horses and in carriages, flooding my stall. They couldn't buy from me inside town because of the ban, but nothing stopped them from riding 3 miles to my stall on the main road. The line stretched down the highway. While people waited for ice, they bought my spiced lamb and braised meat. The heat that was supposed to be my enemy had become my greatest ally. Saya could barely contain herself. She'd been worrying about our salt shortage for weeks, and now salt was flowing in by the hundreds of gene, not purchased with silver, but traded directly for frozen milk that cost us almost nothing to make. By the time my record keeper showed me the afternoon's tally, we'd collected 506 gene of crude salt, 600 gene of black sugar, and 2,000 gene of cheap wine, all without spending a single tael of silver. Huang Wenhua had banned me from his town, so I'd made the town come to me. He'd cut off my salt supply. So I created a product so irresistible that people carried salt to my doorstep voluntarily. The ice business had only been running for a few hours, and it was already changing everything. The ice business exploded beyond anything I expected. As the sun began setting, people were still streaming out of Shanghai town toward my stall. Shopkeepers closed early and rushed out on horseback. Restaurant owners wanted ice to attract more customers. Rich families wanted blocks to cool their homes overnight. The crowd swelled past 1,000 people, choking the highway in both directions. That petty market inspector, Cold Star, rode out to see what the commotion was about. When he realized it was me selling ice, his face twisted with jealousy and rage. He wanted a bowl desperately. He was a glutton who'd taken the livestock market job specifically because it was near food, but he couldn't bring himself to buy from me after threatening me that morning. He tried bribing 2 rich teenagers to buy him a bowl for 10 taels. They refused. He rode away seething, heading straight to the town chief's office to report. I didn't care. Every minute he wasted scheming was another minute my ice was converting into salt, sugar, and cheap wine, the exact resources I needed to keep the horse ranch alive. That evening, the report reached Huang Wenhua at his estate. He was eating dinner in his garden pavilion, still nursing his injuries from the brothel incident. When his steward mentioned Zhao Shua's name, the magistrate's hand froze mid-reach for his wine cup. It slipped and shattered on the ground. He read the letter from the town chief with murder in his eyes. Then he muttered to himself, "This dog can make ice." Unexpected. His original plan had been simple and patient. Cut off my salt supply through official channels. Let my livestock starve. Let my people weaken from salt deprivation and watch everything collapse on its own. A slow death by bureaucratic strangulation. But I'd just blown a hole through that wall. If people were voluntarily bringing me salt in exchange for ice, his blockade was meaningless. Zhao Quan, sitting across from his uncle, was trembling with excitement. Not about revenge, but about the ice-making secret itself. He begged his uncle for the brewing and ice-making formulas once I was dealt with. Huang Wenhua looked at his nephew with contempt and told him to earn it. Zhao Quan, ever the opportunist, offered to leverage his family's connections at the border guard king's mansion to secure his uncle's position in exchange for a cut of future profits. Even in defeat, these two were already dividing up spoils they hadn't won. But that was their problem. Mine was simpler. Keep making ice, keep collecting salt, keep building strength. Every day I survived was a day closer to becoming too strong for them to touch. And today had been a very good day. That evening, I was in a great mood. The ice business had brought in 1,200 gene of edible crude salt by closing time, more than double the initial count, plus 600 gene of black sugar and 2,000 gene of cheap wine, all traded for frozen milk that cost me almost nothing. I invited Yang's son, Zhang Biao, and Zhao Si over to celebrate. We sat around an iron plate in the first courtyard, grilling beef slices with salt and my spice blend. The sizzle and aroma filled the night air. I planned to send each of them home with 10 gene of salt for their 800 men. Zhang Biao was devouring meat as usual. Zhao Si had his eyes closed, savoring each bite with theatrical pleasure. Yang's son raised his cup to toast me. I lifted mine to meet his. What I didn't know was that while we'd been selling ice and celebrating, Huang Wenhua had activated something far more dangerous than corrupt officials or petty market inspectors. After dinner with Zhao Quan, the magistrate had sent his steward to the back gate of his estate with a golden token, a kill order for the criminal underworld. Anyone allied with or indebted to the Huang family would see it as a call to action. The steward blew 3 notes on a whistle, placed a sealed letter in a hidden brick gap, and by the time he checked again, the token was gone. The letter reached a man called the Black Dragon King, leader of the Black Dragon Gang, the most powerful criminal organization in Shanyang County. He wore a golden mask and commanded hundreds of trained fighters. Huang Wenhua had offered him 3,000 gene of salt and a year's passage rights through the northern border checkpoints, a fortune for any gang operating in the shadows. The Black Dragon King's orders were simple: night assault on the horse ranch. Capture me alive. If I resisted, break all 4 of my limbs. He mobilized personally, bringing 2 gang lieutenants, 10 elite guards, and 100 armed fighters. They moved through the darkness toward the ranch. A mysterious fortune teller traveling with the gang had tried to warn him. His divination showed only chaos and confusion, Not the clear victory the Black Dragon King expected. But the gang leader laughed off the warning. He was confident. An overwhelming force against one young lord in the middle of the night. Back in my courtyard, the moon disappeared behind clouds. Wind picked up. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Young Sun raised his cup. I raised mine. Then black-clad figures dropped from every wall simultaneously. Dozens of them, swords and daggers gleaming in the firelight. They'd come for me. Black figures dropped from every wall and rooftop. Over 100 armed fighters filled the courtyard. Women screamed. Servants scattered. Sun Air threw himself in front of me while my bamboo garden men grabbed whatever they could. Sticks, chair legs, anything. 12 elite fighters landed in the center of the yard with practiced grace. One of them stepped forward and confirmed my identity from a sketch he'd memorized. I didn't answer him. I sat there drinking my wine, watching. A barking dog doesn't deserve a response. Yang Sun studied the situation with razor-sharp eyes. Zhang Biao was vibrating with fury, barely restrained by Yang Sen's arm across his chest. Zhao Si crouched beside me, coiled and ready. I gave the signal. Yang Sun released his arm. Zhang Biao exploded forward like a charging bear and slapped the gang lieutenant across the face so hard that teeth and blood sprayed into the air. The man crumpled. Then I issued my orders rapidly, one after another. Yang Sun, wait for the real leader to appear and take him down. Zhang Biao, destroy the 12 elites, alive if possible, dead if necessary. Zhao Si, stay close and support wherever needed. Sun Air, sprint to the second courtyard and bring out the armored spearmen and crossbowmen. Saya, run to the workers' quarters and rally all 3,000 ranch residents with torches and weapons. Tell them anyone who fights well tonight gets salt as a reward. I was calm. My voice was steady. Every instruction was precise. Yang Sun later told me that watching me command under ambush convinced him completely. This wasn't just a clever businessman. This was a born leader. Then the real boss appeared. A massive figure dropped from the sky, hitting the ground hard enough to shake it. He wore a golden mask and radiated killing intent. The Black Dragon King himself. Zhang Biao threw a punch. The gang leader met it with his own fist. Zhang Biao barely moved one step back. The Black Dragon King staggered 10 steps. He was shocked. In all of Shanyang County, nobody had ever matched his strength. But the Black Dragon King was fast. He used his superior agility to flash behind Zhang Biao's back, appearing with a dagger aimed at the base of Zhang Biao's skull. Zhang Biao couldn't track him, and sweat broke out on his forehead. I'm right here, Zhao Si said casually. He slapped the dagger out of the Black Dragon King's hand and smacked him across the forehead in one fluid motion. The golden mask flew off, revealing a face so horrifically burned it looked like melted wax, scarred beyond recognition, kept tolerable only by medicinal paste under the mask. Without the mask's protection, the exposed flesh screamed with pain. The Black Dragon King clawed at his own face, blood seeping from every crack. He went berserk. Abandoning all strategy, he screamed for his men to kill everyone. The 12 elites rushed Zhang Biao and Zhao Si simultaneously. Yang Sun drew his long blade and charged in to support them, which left me standing alone in the open. The Black Dragon King saw his chance. He launched himself straight at me, eyes wild with rage and agony. I stood my ground and waited, because I knew what was coming next. Everything happened in seconds. The Black Dragon King's elites surrounded Yang Sun and pinned down Zhang Biao and Zhao Si. 2 gang lieutenants and 3 guards boxed Yang Sun in. He swung his massive cleaving blade and split one guard clean in half, then beheaded a lieutenant. But he couldn't break free fast enough. Zhang Biao skewered guards left and right with his spear, but there were too many. Zhao Si tried to leap toward me, but someone grabbed his ankle. All 3 of my warriors screamed my name. They couldn't reach me in time. The Black Dragon King charged straight at me, blood streaming down his exposed face, hands outstretched to grab me. Then I saw them, my 50 armored spearmen and 15 crossbowmen, rushing into the courtyard. I ducked behind a pillar and dove into their formation. Mount an array, I shouted. 5 rows formed instantly. 50 bamboo spears leveled forward like a wall of needles. Thrust. The Black Dragon King was already too close, momentum carrying him forward. He tried to stop, but couldn't. A dozen spear points punched through his body simultaneously, chest, stomach, arms. Then 3 more found his eyes and mouth. He went rigid and collapsed, skewered like a grotesque puppet, dead before he hit the ground. Yang Sun stared in awe. Zhang Biao howled with excitement. The remaining gang elites, 1 lieutenant and 5 guards, tried to escape by leaping onto the rooftops. Crossbows, I ordered. 15 hand crossbows, 5 bolts each. 70-plus arrows filled the sky in a single heartbeat. The fleeing fighters were shredded mid-air, pierced through and tumbling back to earth. Only 1 guard survived by pressing flat against a wall, and even he had 3 bolts in his body. The 100 regular gang fighters panicked and scrambled over the walls to flee. Zhang Biao grabbed his spear and chased after them with Zhao Si. Meanwhile, Saya had done her job. Thousands of ranch residents were converging from all directions carrying torches and makeshift weapons, forming a net the fleeing criminals couldn't easily escape. The gang fighters plunged into a nearby stream to hide, crawling upstream toward where they'd left their horses. By the time they reached the spot, barely 60 survivors out of 100. They were soaked, freezing, and desperate. They jumped onto their horses, but they'd made one fatal miscalculation. My black stallion, the horse king, had been grazing nearby with his 15 companion stallions and his claimed mare. These were his grounds now, his territory, and suddenly 100 strange horses had appeared in the middle of it. The horse king charged out of the darkness like a living battering ram, screaming with fury. He mounted the lead survivor's mare, asserting dominance. That mare instantly flattened her ears and submitted. Every other horse in the gang's group dropped to the ground at the horse king's commanding bellow. 60 armed criminals sat on horses that refused to move, frozen in obedience to a stallion that answered to no one but himself. And, increasingly, to me. The horse king had just done what an entire army couldn't: immobilize the enemy's escape. The gang's horses wouldn't budge. Every rider kicked and whipped, but their mounts lay flat or stood frozen, ears pinned back in total submission to the horse king. The criminals couldn't understand what was happening. One of them, the last surviving elite guard, Hu Sheng, figured it out. The horse king was an alpha, and his presence triggered an instinctive obedience in every horse around him. Like a lion walking into a stable, the lesser animals simply couldn't disobey. Hu Sheng ordered his men to kill the horse king. A dozen fighters drew their blades and charged. But the horse king was no ordinary animal. He dodged and circled, bellowing war cries that echoed for miles. His 15 stallion companions formed a battle line beside him, and the mother mare he'd claimed rallied the 100-plus gang horses, turning them against their own riders. Hooves lashed out. Teeth found flesh. Hu Sheng took 2 kicks to the face. One caved in his nose, the other cracked his skull open. He bled out on the grass. The surviving gang members scattered on foot, exhausted and horseless. Zhao Si arrived first, using his agility to cover ground quickly. He found the scene and burst out laughing. He'd seen wild animals attack people before, but never an organized cavalry charge led by horses against humans. The mother mare was directing the pack like a general, coordinating pursuit patterns that mimicked actual military tactics: straight charges, flanking circles, surrounding formations, all in response to the horse king's calls. Zhao Si didn't even need to fight. He just watched the horses do the work. An hour later, I arrived with Saya and thousands of ranch workers carrying torches. 31 gang members lay on the ground, half with serious injuries, bitten off ears, shattered ribs, trampled limbs. They looked like they'd been through a meat grinder. Then the horse king trotted over to me. He pressed his nose against my chest, licked my arm, and rubbed his neck against mine. Over the past few days, I'd been the one feeding him salt and premium grain by hand, brushing his coat, washing him personally. He'd bonded with me completely. "You did good tonight," I said, stroking his massive head. "Extra feed and salt for you." The final tally. The Black Dragon King, dead, skewered by my spearmen. Both gang lieutenants, dead. 9 of 10 elite guards, dead. The last one barely escaped with 3 crossbow bolts in his body. Of the 100 regular fighters, roughly 40 were killed during the chase, 31 captured by the horse stampede, and the rest scattered into the darkness wounded and broken. Huang Wenhua's underworld weapon had been completely destroyed in a single night. His most powerful criminal ally was dead. His secret connection to the gang was now exposed through the bodies and equipment left behind. And the Horse King, the 10,000 tail stallion I'd bought on impulse that morning, had proven himself worth more than any army. He wasn't just a breeding horse. He was a guardian, a weapon, and a symbol of everything I was building. I rode him back to the manor under a sky full of torches, my people cheering on both sides of the road.